Sir, if you don't calm your child, I'll have to ask you to move to the back of the plane. The words sliced through Caleb Harrow's carefully constructed world like a blade through silk. For 3 hours, the man who had built empires with a single phone call sat powerless in seat 2A, his 7-month-old son's screams tearing through the cabin like sirens. First-class passengers shot daggers with their eyes. Flight attendants whispered behind polished smiles. His designer suit was soaked with sweat and spit up. His billion-dollar reputation was crumbling at 35,000 feet, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Then, from the shadows of economy, a voice he'd never expected cut through the chaos. "I think I can help." Caleb turned to see a 16-year-old black kid standing in the aisle, worn backpack hanging off one shoulder, eyes steady despite the risk he was taking. The entire cabin held its breath. This is the story of how everything changed. Stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The plane had been in the air for 2 hours and 47 minutes when Caleb Harrow realized he was about to break. Not financially, not professionally. Those domains remained firmly under his control, fortified by years of calculated risks and ruthless execution. No, this was something far more primal, far more terrifying, the complete and utter loss of control over a 7-pound human being who refused to stop screaming. "Please," Caleb whispered into his son's ear, bouncing him gently against his shoulder. "Please, Marcus, please." The baby's face was red, contorted in misery. His tiny fists clenched as another wail erupted from his lungs. Caleb felt the eyes boring into his back from every direction. The woman across the aisle had stopped pretending to read her magazine 20 minutes ago and was now openly glaring. The elderly gentleman in 1A had requested his noise-canceling headphones be upgraded. Twice. Even the flight attendants, trained in the art of diplomatic smiles, were beginning to show cracks in their professional facades. "Sir?" The head flight attendant, Miranda, appeared beside him with that particular expression service workers develop when patience is running thin. "Is there anything we can do? We've tried the formula, the pacifier." "I know what you've tried," Caleb snapped, immediately regretting his tone. "I'm sorry, He won't stop. He's never like this. Something's wrong, and I don't know what." Miranda's expression softened slightly. "Is his mother not here?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He didn't owe anyone an explanation, but the words came anyway, defensive and raw. "She's in London already. Work emergency. I was supposed to fly out tomorrow, but the nanny got food poisoning this morning, so here we are. Solo father of the year, apparently failing spectacularly at altitude." Another scream. This one seemed to pierce directly into Caleb's skull, vibrating through his bones. A businessman 2 rows back muttered something about entitled rich people who can't even manage their own kids. Caleb heard it. He was meant to hear it. "Would you like to try walking him to the back galley?" Miranda suggested. "Sometimes the change of scenery helps." Caleb stood, Marcus still wailing against his shoulder, and began the walk of shame toward the rear of the aircraft. Every step felt like a gauntlet. Passengers in business class looked up from their laptops and cocktails with expressions ranging from sympathy to outright hostility. A toddler in 12C pointed and said loudly, "Mommy, that baby is being bad. "Shh, sweetheart," the mother replied, but her eyes told Caleb everything he needed to know about her judgment. By the time he reached the galley between business and economy, Caleb's shirt was soaked through with sweat. His carefully styled hair, the subject of a profile piece in Forbes just last month, was disheveled and damp. His hands were shaking. "This is insane," he muttered to Marcus, who paused his crying just long enough to draw breath for another assault. "You're 7 months old. You're supposed to sleep on planes." "That's what babies do. That's what every parenting book said you'd do." Marcus screamed his opinion of parenting books directly into Caleb's ear. A flight attendant named James approached with a sympathetic smile and a warm bottle. "Sometimes they just need—" "He's not hungry," Caleb interrupted, exhaustion making him sharp. He threw up the last bottle. "I think something's actually wrong, but I can't figure out what. His diaper's clean, he's not running a fever, there's no rash, I've checked everything." James nodded slowly. "Well, we're still 5 hours from London. If you need medical assistance, we can radio ahead." "No." Caleb shook his head firmly. "No hospitals. No emergency landings. I can handle this. I just need him to stop crying for 5 goddamn minutes so I can think. But Marcus had other plans. The screaming intensified, reaching a pitch that seemed to vibrate the galley walls. Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every critical stare, every whispered complaint, every unspoken judgment about his parenting, his wealth, his presumed inability to handle something as basic as a crying infant. If they could see me now, he thought bitterly. Caleb Harrow, founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies, worth $2.3 billion, according to this morning's market close, completely defeated by a baby. That's when he heard the voice. "Excuse me." Caleb opened his eyes to find a teenage boy standing at the edge of the galley. He was black, maybe 16 or 17, wearing a faded hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. His backpack looked like it had survived a war, held together with duct tape and determination. Everything about him screamed economy class, the very back rows where people paid with carefully saved money and hoped their luggage wouldn't get lost. The boy's eyes were fixed on Marcus, not on Caleb, and there was something in his expression that made Caleb pause despite his exhaustion. "I'm sorry, son, but passengers aren't allowed in the galley," James said gently, already moving to guide the boy back to his seat. "I know," the boy said quickly. I think I might know what's wrong with the baby." Caleb's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Unless you're a pediatrician hiding in economy class, I don't think, his ear hurts." The boy's voice was quiet but certain. "The way he's pulling at it, the way he's arching his back when he cries, it's an ear infection. The pressure from the plane is making it worse." Caleb looked down at Marcus, really looked, and saw that the boy was right. Marcus's tiny hand was clawing at his left ear, had been for the last 20 minutes, but Caleb had been too overwhelmed to notice the pattern. "How did you—" Caleb started. "I raised my little brothers and sisters," the boy said simply. "All 4 of them. I know that cry." There was something in the way he said it, a weariness that belonged to someone much older that made Caleb's professional instincts kick in, despite the chaos. This wasn't some random kid offering unwanted advice. This was someone who had lived experience written into his bones. "Okay," Caleb said slowly. "So what do I do about it?" "Do you have any pain reliever? Infant Tylenol, anything like that?" Caleb's stomach dropped. "No, I didn't think. We were only supposed to be on the plane for 8 hours, and he's never had problems before. It's okay." The boy held up his hands in a calming gesture. "The pressure change triggered it. It happens. But there's something else you can try." He hesitated, and Caleb could see the internal calculation happening behind his eyes. "I could show you if you want, or I could try to help calm him down while you figure out the medical stuff." Every alarm bell in Caleb's sophisticated security system of a brain started ringing. Here was a stranger, a kid from the back of the plane, offering to handle his infant son. He didn't know this boy's name, his background, his intentions. In Caleb's world, you didn't hand your most precious asset to an unknown variable. But Marcus screamed again, and something in Caleb's chest cracked. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eli. Eli Brooks." "I'm Caleb Harrow. This is Marcus." He paused, weighing risk against desperation. "If I let you try to calm him, what exactly are you planning to do?" "Just hold him a certain way," Eli said, on his side with his bad ear up, and apply a little gentle warmth and pressure. "It's not magic or anything. It's just something my grandmother taught me when my brother Jamal got his first ear infection." The mention of a grandmother made something in Caleb relax slightly. He didn't know why, maybe because grandmothers represented some universal standard of trustworthiness in his mind, a throwback to his own childhood before wealth and power had complicated everything. "James," Caleb said, turning to the flight attendant, "this is highly irregular, but I'm going to let this young man attempt to help. If anything seems off, I want you right here. Understood?" James looked uncertain, but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Harrow." Caleb turned back to Eli, who was already removing his worn backpack and setting it carefully against the galley wall. "If this goes wrong, it won't," Eli said simply. "But I understand if you'd rather just show you the technique instead." There was no pushiness in his tone, no ego, just a quiet confidence that came from experience rather than arrogance. Caleb recognized it because he'd spent his entire career learning to distinguish between the two. All right. Caleb shifted Marcus carefully, preparing to transfer him. But slowly. He doesn't like strangers. Most babies don't, Eli agreed. He held out his hands, and Caleb noticed for the first time that they were rougher than they should be for a teenager, calloused and worn. Working hands. Hey there, little man, Eli said softly to Marcus. I know it hurts. I know everything feels wrong up here in the sky. But we're going to make it better, okay? Marcus's screaming hitched slightly, as if surprised by the new voice. Caleb seized the moment of relative quiet to transfer his son into Eli's arms. The change was immediate and startling. Eli cradled Marcus against his chest, angling him so his left ear was facing upward, away from pressure. Then he did something unexpected. He started humming, a low, rhythmic melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. His hand moved in slow, gentle circles on Marcus's back, and his other hand provided a warm, steady presence against the side of the baby's head. What are you humming? James asked, fascinated. Just something my grandmother used to sing, Eli said quietly, never breaking the rhythm. My brother Jamal, he used to have terrible ear infections. This was the only thing that would calm him down until we could get him to the clinic. Did you live with your grandmother? Caleb heard himself ask, though it was none of his business. For a while, Eli's expression remained focused on Marcus. After my mom passed, cancer, when I was 11. Grandma took all 5 of us in, me and my 4 younger siblings. She worked 2 jobs and still found time to teach me everything about taking care of kids. Said somebody had to know, and I was the oldest. The words were delivered without self-pity or performance, just facts laid bare. Caleb felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Recognition, maybe, of how radically different their lives had been at age 11. When Caleb was 11, his biggest concern had been whether he'd make the travel soccer team. When Eli was 11, he'd been learning to parent his siblings while grieving his mother. Marcus's crying was slowing, not stopping, but definitely decreasing in intensity. His tiny fists had unclenched, and his body had relaxed against Eli's chest. I can't believe this is working, James murmured. It's not magic, Eli repeated, still humming between words. It's just physics and comfort. The warm pressure helps with the pain, and the position keeps the fluid in his ear from putting more pressure on his eardrum. The humming. Babies can feel vibrations. It's soothing. My grandmother swore it was because the vibration distracted them from the pain signals, but I don't know if that's scientific or just something she believed. It's working, Caleb said, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Whatever the reason, it's actually working. And it was. Marcus's cries had diminished to occasional whimpers, his eyes growing heavy as Eli's humming continued. The galley, which had been filled with the sound of infant distress for 3 hours, was suddenly miraculously quiet. Other passengers began to notice. A woman from business class actually stood up to peer into the galley, her expression transforming from irritation to astonishment. The businessman who'd made the comment about entitled rich people craned his neck to see what had happened to the screaming baby. How long should he stay like this? Caleb asked, watching his son's face smooth out into something approaching peace. As long as he's comfortable, Eli said. Once we land, you should get him to a doctor for proper antibiotics. This is just temporary relief, but it'll help him make it through the flight without being in so much pain. You said you have 4 siblings, Caleb found himself saying. All younger? Yes, sir. Jamal's 13 now. Twins Maya and Marcus. Eli paused, a slight smile crossing his face. Actually, your son shares a name with my little brother. Anyway, Maya and Marcus are 11, and Keisha is 9. And you take care of all of them? Took care of, Eli corrected gently. Past tense. They live with my aunt now, in Chicago. I'm still on the south side, but I got placed in a different situation when I turned 16, foster care logistics, but I see them every weekend, make sure they're doing their homework, help with dinner, all that. The casual way he described this life, split from his siblings, navigating foster care, still maintaining responsibility across unstable living situations, made Caleb's breath catch. He tried to imagine what that kind of resilience looked like at 16 and couldn't quite grasp it. Marcus was fully asleep now, his breathing even and peaceful against Eli's chest. The transformation was so complete that several passengers had begun to applaud softly. "You have a gift," James said to Eli, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine warmth. "That was remarkable." Eli ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just practice. Anyone who's raised babies knows these tricks." "Not anyone," Caleb said firmly. "I certainly didn't, and I've read approximately 17 books on infant care in the last 7 months. He paused, studying the boy who'd solved in 5 minutes what wealth and education couldn't crack. "What are you doing on this flight, Eli? Are you traveling alone?" "Yes, sir. I'm heading to London for a competition." "What kind of competition?" Eli shifted slightly, careful not to disturb Marcus. "The International Mathematics Olympiad, IMO. It's a competition for high school students. I qualified through the U.S. team." Caleb felt his eyebrows rise. The International Mathematics Olympiad wasn't some local science fair. It was the most prestigious mathematics competition in the world for pre-college students. Countries sent their best and brightest. Winners went on to places like MIT, Cambridge, Princeton. "That's incredible," Caleb said, meaning it. Your school must have an excellent program." Something flickered across Eli's face, too quick to fully identify, but sharp enough to cut. "My school's program is okay. I mostly taught myself. There's this website, Khan Academy, and some YouTube channels. And the public library has good internet if you can get there before all the computers are taken." The implication hung in the air. Eli had prepared for one of the world's most challenging academic competitions using free internet at a public library, teaching himself advanced mathematics between raising siblings and navigating foster care. "The flight must have cost," Caleb started, then stopped, realizing how the question might sound. But Eli didn't seem offended. "Community fundraiser," he explained simply. "My high school math teacher, Mrs. Chen, she started a GoFundMe when I qualified. The neighborhood raised enough for the flight and the registration fees. I'm staying at a hostel near the competition venue. It's all figured out." A GoFundMe, Caleb thought. This kid is representing the United States at an international mathematics competition, and he needed a GoFundMe to afford the flight. "What's the prize if you win?" James asked, clearly as captivated by Eli's story as Caleb was. "There's no prize money," Eli said. "Just medals and recognition. But it looks good for college applications. That's the real prize, a chance at scholarships, maybe even a full ride somewhere." "Maybe." Caleb couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. "Eli, if you place well in the IMO, you could have your pick of universities. The top programs actively recruit IMO medalists." Eli's smile was patient, the kind that suggested he'd heard optimistic projections from well-meaning people before. "That's what Mrs. Chen says. But I'm trying not to count on anything until it happens. I'm just focused on doing my best and seeing where it leads." Marcus stirred slightly in his sleep, and Eli automatically adjusted his position, his movements so practiced they seemed instinctive. The baby settled back into peaceful sleep without fully waking. "You're a natural with him," Caleb observed. "Have you ever considered pediatrics? Nursing?" "Can't afford medical school," Eli said matter-of-factly. "Maybe someday, if the math thing works out and I can get scholarships for undergrad, then save up for medical school. But that's a long road. Right now I'm just trying to get through senior year and qualify for something that won't leave me drowning in debt." The pragmatism in his voice, the absence of dreams cushioned by safety nets, struck Caleb harder than it should have. He'd made his first million by 25, his first billion by 32. His son would never have to worry about student loans or whether he could afford to pursue his passions. Marcus would have every door opened, every opportunity handed to him on a silver platter, simply by virtue of being born Caleb Harrow's child. And here was Eli Brooks, brilliant enough to represent his country, compassionate enough to help a stranger's screaming baby, pragmatic enough to know that talent alone might not be enough to overcome the mathematics of poverty. "How long can you hold him?" Caleb asked. "I don't want to take advantage." "I'm fine," Eli assured him. "Honestly, this is easier than carrying my baby sister around for hours when she was colicky. Your son's lighter than she was." "Still," Caleb insisted, "you must be uncomfortable. That's not exactly a recliner. Mr. Harrow, I'm standing in the galley of an airplane heading to London to compete in the most important mathematics competition of my life. I'm more than comfortable. I'm living a dream I wasn't sure would ever happen. Standing here holding a sleeping baby is the easiest thing I've done all month. There was no bitterness in the words, no resentment, just a genuine appreciation for circumstances that most people in first class would consider barely adequate. It made Caleb feel simultaneously humbled and slightly ashamed of every complaint he'd ever lodged about airline food or seat width. "Tell me about the competition," Caleb said, genuinely curious now. "What kind of problems will you be solving?" Eli's face lit up, and for the first time, Caleb saw the 16-year-old beneath the caretaker. "They're proof-based problems, mostly. You have to demonstrate why something is mathematically true, not just solve for X. They cover number theory, combinatorics, algebra, geometry, all the deep stuff that makes you see patterns in how numbers behave. It's beautiful, actually." "Beautiful?" Caleb smiled. "Most people wouldn't describe mathematics as beautiful." "Then most people haven't seen it deeply enough," Eli said with quiet confidence. "There's this problem I've been working on from last year's competition. It took me 3 weeks to solve, but when I finally saw the solution, it was like watching a sunrise. Everything just clicked into place, elegant and perfect. That's what the IMO is really testing. Can you see the elegant solution hiding inside the chaos? Can you see the elegant solution hiding inside the chaos?" Caleb turned the phrase over in his mind. It was perhaps the most succinct description of what he did as a tech entrepreneur, finding order in disorder, creating systems where none existed. "You know," Caleb said slowly, "my company, Nexus Technologies, we're always looking for people who can see patterns others miss. Problem solvers who think laterally. What you're describing, finding elegant solutions in chaos, that's exactly what we need." Eli's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "I appreciate that, Mr. Harrow, but I'm still in high school. I'm not offering you a job right now," Caleb clarified quickly. "I'm just saying that when you're ready, when you finish school and you're looking at options, Nexus should be on your list. We have internship programs, scholarship partnerships with several universities. I'd like to give you my card before we land." "Thank you," Eli said, though his tone suggested he'd heard similar promises before from people who meant well but followed through poorly. "That's kind of you." They lapsed into comfortable silence. Marcus continued to sleep peacefully. The plane's engines hummed steadily. Passengers began to relax now that the crying had stopped, some even dozing off themselves. James returned with a pillow and a bottle of water for Eli. "You're a miracle worker," he said warmly. "Can I get you anything else? Snacks from first class, maybe?" "The water's perfect," Eli said. "Thank you." "How about a first-class seat?" Caleb heard himself say. "James, could we arrange for Eli to move up? There's an empty seat in my row. It seems wrong to have him stand here the whole flight when he's the reason my son finally stopped crying." Eli's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't. That's not necessary." "It's absolutely necessary," Caleb insisted. "You've done more to help me in the last 20 minutes than anyone has in months. Let me do this small thing in return. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "if Marcus wakes up screaming again, I'll need you close by." "Mr. Harrow, I'm not sure that's within policy," James said carefully. "We'd need to check with the captain about seat changes." "James?" Caleb fixed him with the look that had closed billion-dollar deals. "I'm fairly certain that given the choice between a screaming baby in first class for another 4 hours or bending the rules to seat the person who solved that problem, the captain will make the practical choice. Make it happen." To his credit, James simply nodded and moved toward the flight deck. "You don't have to do this," Eli said quietly. "I really am fine back in my seat. It was just me trying to help. I didn't do it for an upgrade." "I know you didn't," Caleb said, and that was perhaps the most important part. Eli hadn't angled for recognition or reward. He'd seen a problem and solved it, motivated by nothing more than compassion and the practical knowledge that he could help. But sometimes people do things worth rewarding even when they don't seek reward, especially then. James returned quickly with a smile. "Captain approved. Eli, if you'll follow me, we'll get you settled in 2C, right across from Mr. Harrow." "But what about my stuff?" Eli asked. "Practical to the end?" My backpack is back in 47E, and my seat neighbor probably thinks I went to the bathroom. I'll retrieve your belongings and explain the situation, James assured him. Don't worry, your seat neighbor will understand. Trust me, the entire back of the plane heard the baby stop crying. They know something changed up here. Slowly, carefully, Eli transferred Marcus back to Caleb's arms. The baby stirred slightly, but didn't wake, his breathing still deep and even. Caleb marveled at the weight of his son in his arms, simultaneously nothing and everything. Keep his bad ear up, Eli reminded him softly. And if he does wake up upset, that humming technique works better than you'd think. Low notes, steady rhythm. You don't have to be good at it, just consistent. I'll try, Caleb promised. Though I'm warning you now, my singing voice has been described as weaponized by multiple people. Eli laughed, genuine and bright. I bet your son won't care about your pitch, just that you're there. They made their way back to first class, James leading the way. Passengers who'd been glaring at Caleb hours ago now watched with curiosity as the teenager from economy took the seat across the aisle, settling in with obvious discomfort at the luxury surrounding him. The seat reclines, Caleb said helpfully, nodding toward the controls, and there's a meal service in about an hour. Order anything you want. This is insane, Eli muttered, running his hand over the leather armrest. These seats probably cost more than my whole trip. Probably, Caleb agreed without shame. But you earned it. And honestly, I'm being selfish. If Marcus wakes up screaming again, I need the expert close by. Eli smiled at that, relaxing slightly. I'll make you a deal. You let me help if he wakes up, and I'll stop feeling weird about sitting in first class. Deal. James returned with Eli's backpack, which looked even more worn and battered next to the polished surroundings of first class. He also brought a hot towel, a menu, and a genuine smile. Anything you need, Eli. Just press your call button. You're officially a first-class passenger now. Once James had moved on to attend to other passengers, Caleb studied Eli more carefully. The boy was looking out the window at the clouds below, and there was something in his expression, wonder mixed with disbelief, as if he was still processing that this was really happening. First time in first class? Caleb asked. First time flying at all, Eli admitted. Before today, I'd never been on a plane. Never been outside of Illinois, actually. I got my first passport 2 weeks ago. Caleb tried to imagine what that must feel like. To have lived 16 years in one small geographic area, and then suddenly to be flying across an ocean to compete on an international stage. The courage that required, the mental adjustment, the sheer weight of representing not just yourself, but everyone who donated to your GoFundMe. Are you nervous? Caleb asked. About the competition? Terrified, Eli said honestly. I'm good at math, I know I'm good. But the IMO? These are the best math students from every country in the world. Kids who've been trained by private tutors, who've gone to schools with advanced programs, who've been preparing for this their whole lives. And here I am, learned most of it from YouTube. YouTube and determination, Caleb corrected. YouTube doesn't qualify you for the IMO. Your brain did that. Your work did that. Maybe. Eli didn't sound convinced. I guess I'll find out in a few days. Marcus shifted in Caleb's arms, making a small sound of discomfort. Immediately, Eli leaned forward. Try the humming, he suggested, just like I did, low and steady. Caleb felt ridiculous, but he started humming anyway, trying to match the deep, rhythmic sound Eli had produced. He sounded like a broken washing machine, but Marcus settled back into sleep. See, Eli said with a grin. Not so hard. Easy for you to say. You actually know what you're doing. You're learning, Eli said. That's what matters. They fell into easy conversation after that, the kind that happens between strangers who've unexpectedly connected over shared crisis. Eli told him about his siblings, describing Jamal's obsession with basketball and Maya's dream of becoming a veterinarian. He talked about Mrs. Chen, his math teacher, who'd stayed after school 3 days a week for 2 years to prepare him for competitions. He spoke about his grandmother, who'd passed away 2 years ago, but whose influence clearly still guided him. Caleb, in turn, found himself sharing more than he typically would with a stranger. He talked about the pressure of running a company that employed thousands, the constant scrutiny, the way success had isolated him. He mentioned Marcus's mother, Elizabeth, without going into the painful details of their fractured relationship. He even admitted his fear of failing as a father, of somehow screwing up the one job that mattered more than any business deal. "You won't," Eli said with surprising confidence. "You care enough to be scared. That's half the battle right there." "How do you know?" "Because the bad parents? They're not worried. They figure kids just work out somehow, or they don't think about it at all. You're here, on a plane with your son, freaking out because you couldn't fix his pain. That's a good dad. You just had a problem you hadn't encountered before. Now you know better." Caleb wanted to believe him. More than that, he wanted to absorb some of Eli's quiet certainty, his unshakable sense that problems had solutions if you just looked at them from the right angle. The meal service came and went. Eli tried every item on his tray with the focused attention of someone experiencing truly good food for the first time. Caleb found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of watching someone appreciate what he took for granted. "This chicken is incredible," Eli said after his first bite. "What is this sauce?" "Béarnaise, I think. Or maybe Hollandaise. I honestly can't tell the difference." Eli laughed. "Of course you can't. Why would you need to? You probably eat like this all the time." "Not really," Caleb said, though it was only partially true. He ate well, but rarely with any real pleasure. Food had become fuel, something consumed between meetings or during conference calls. "I've forgotten how to taste things, I think. Too busy, too stressed." "Then slow down," Eli said simply. "Life's too short to not taste your food." It was such uncomplicated wisdom, delivered without pretension, and it hit Caleb harder than it should have. When had he stopped tasting things? When had everything become about optimization and efficiency rather than experience? Marcus slept through the entire meal, his little ear apparently much happier in the adjusted position. Caleb watched his son's face, peaceful in sleep, and felt a surge of protective love so intense it nearly brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly to Eli. "I mean it. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in." "You would have figured something out," Eli said. "You seem like someone who always does." "Maybe, but I would have been miserable for 4 more hours, and so would Marcus, and every other passenger on this plane. You saved us all." Eli ducked his head, uncomfortable again with direct praise. "I just did what anyone who'd raised babies would do." "But not everyone has raised babies," Caleb pointed out. "Most 16-year-olds are worried about homework and video games and dating. You were raising 4 siblings. That's not just anything. That's extraordinary." "Circumstances made it necessary," Eli said. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Caleb countered. "You could have resented it, done it badly, checked out emotionally. Plenty of people would have. But you didn't. You learned, you adapted, you became genuinely skilled at caregiving. That says everything about who you are." Eli looked at him with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and sadness, acceptance and resistance. "I appreciate that, Mr. Harrow, but I'm not special. I'm just a kid who did what he had to do to keep his family together. There are thousands of kids like me, maybe millions. We're just usually invisible." The word invisible hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. How many brilliant, capable, compassionate people moved through the world unnoticed, their talents hidden behind circumstances and economic barriers? How many Elise were out there, solving problems with YouTube and public library computers, raising siblings while simultaneously teaching themselves advanced mathematics? "Maybe you've been invisible," Caleb said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "But maybe that's about to change." Eli gave him a curious look. "What do you mean?" "The IMO," Caleb said. "If you do well, when you do well, people will notice. Universities, scholarship committees, maybe even media. Your story is compelling, Eli. Not just what you've overcome, but what you've accomplished despite it." "I don't want to be a story," Eli said quickly, something sharp entering his voice. "I don't want to be the inspiring poor kid who beat the odds. I just want to be good at math. I want to be recognized for my brain, not my circumstances." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding the distinction. "Fair enough, but those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Your circumstances shaped your brain, the problem solving you learned from raising siblings, the determination you developed from teaching yourself. Those are assets, not just obstacles you overcame. Maybe, Eli conceded, I just don't want people to look at me and see a charity case. I want them to see someone who belongs in the room because I earned it. Then prove it, Caleb said simply. Go to London, solve impossible problems, and show them exactly what you're capable of. Make them remember your name. Eli smiled at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. No pressure, right? You said you were terrified earlier, Caleb reminded him. Good. Use it. Let that fear sharpen you instead of paralyzing you. I've closed some of my biggest deals scared out of my mind. The fear means it matters. They talked for another hour, topics flowing naturally from mathematics to philosophy to Eli's plans for the future. Caleb learned that Eli wanted to study theoretical mathematics, possibly go into research. He dreamed of proving something significant, contributing to the field in a way that would outlast him. Most people don't think about legacy at 16, Caleb observed. Most people don't lose their mother at 11, Eli replied quietly. When you watch someone die young, you start thinking about what you'll leave behind. What will prove you were here, that you mattered? Caleb had no response to that. His own thoughts about legacy had always been centered around money, companies, tangible assets. The idea of leaving behind an intellectual contribution, a proof or theorem that would exist in perpetuity, struck him as both more abstract and more permanent than anything he'd built. As the plane began its descent toward London, the cabin lights brightened and passengers stirred from sleep. Marcus woke slowly, blinking up at his father with confusion, but not distress. His ear was still bothering him. Caleb could see it in the way he fussed when turned to that side, but the acute pain seemed to have subsided. We'll get you to a doctor as soon as we land, Caleb promised his son, and then you'll feel all better. There's a clinic at Terminal 5, James said, appearing with landing cards. I can direct you there if needed. Thank you, James, for everything. My pleasure, Mr. Harrow, and Eli, James added, turning to the teenager. It was an honor to have you in first class. You're welcome back any time. Eli grinned. I don't think my budget will allow that anytime soon, but I appreciate the sentiment. As the plane touched down smoothly at Heathrow, Caleb felt an unexpected reluctance to let this strange interlude end. For a few hours, he'd connected with someone genuinely interesting, someone whose perspective challenged his assumptions about talent, opportunity, and what mattered in life. Eli, he said as passengers began gathering their belongings, I meant what I said earlier. I want you to have my contact information, not just for a potential job someday, though that offer is genuine, but because I'd like to know how the competition goes. I'd like to know how your story continues. You don't have to do that, Eli said automatically. I know I don't have to. I want to. Caleb pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, then thought better of it and pulled out a second one, writing his personal cell number on the back. The office number is on the front. My direct line is on the back. Call or text anytime. Update me from the competition. And if you need anything, and I mean anything, reach out. Eli took the cards carefully, as if they might dissolve in his hands. Thank you, Mr. Harrow, for the upgrade, for treating me like I mattered. You do matter, Caleb said firmly, more than you know. And call me Caleb. Mr. Harrow makes me sound like my father. They disembarked together, Marcus now awake but peaceful in his carrier. The terminal was crowded with early morning travelers, everyone rushing toward customs and baggage claim. Caleb arranged for an airport assistant to help Eli with directions to his hostel over Eli's protest that he could figure it out. Save your problem-solving energy for the competition, Caleb insisted. Let someone else handle the logistics for once. As they parted ways at the arrivals hall, Caleb toward the taxi queue for private cars, Eli toward the underground. The teenager turned back one more time. I hope Marcus's ear feels better soon, he said. And I hope you remember to taste your food sometimes. You deserve that. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with his worn backpack and his borrowed confidence, heading toward a competition that would either validate his years of solitary study or prove that YouTube and determination weren't quite enough. Caleb stood watching the space where Eli had vanished for longer than was rational, Marcus drowsy against his chest, feeling like he'd just witnessed something important that he couldn't quite name. His phone buzzed with messages, urgent ones from his London office, status updates on meetings he'd be late for, requests for decisions only he could make. The real world was reasserting itself, demanding his attention, pulling him back into the carefully constructed empire of Nexus Technologies. But as Caleb climbed into the car that would take him to his hotel, then to the clinic, then to his packed schedule of obligations, he found himself thinking not about quarterly earnings or product launches, but about a 16-year-old who'd learned mathematics from YouTube, who'd raised 4 siblings while teaching himself to see elegant solutions in chaos, who'd stepped into first class for the first time and helped a stranger's baby not for reward, but simply because he could. And Caleb wondered, with the uncomfortable recognition that he'd been living wrong somehow, what it would mean to truly taste his food again, to find beauty in problems, to measure success by something other than the numbers in his bank account. Marcus made a small sound, reaching up with tiny fingers to grab at his father's collar. Caleb kissed his son's forehead gently, breathing in the soft baby smell, feeling the weight of responsibility and love in equal measure. "You're going to meet a lot of impressive people in your life," he told Marcus quietly. "But I hope you remember the boy who helped you on the plane. I hope you learn to be like him, someone who sees problems and solves them not because there's profit in it, but because it's right." The car pulled away from the terminal, heading into London traffic. Behind them, somewhere in the underground system, Eli Brooks was riding toward his own uncertain future, carrying nothing but a battered backpack, 2 business cards, and a mind capable of seeing patterns others couldn't. The screaming had stopped, but in its place, something else had begun. A connection, a possibility, a question mark hovering over both their futures that neither of them could yet fully understand. The International Mathematics Olympiad headquarters occupied a converted lecture hall at Imperial College London, its Gothic architecture somehow appropriate for a gathering of the world's most brilliant young mathematical minds. Eli stood outside the main entrance 3 days after the flight, his stomach twisting with anxiety despite the confidence he'd projected to Caleb Harrow. The building seemed to loom over him, all ancient stone and impossible expectations. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," a voice said beside him. Eli turned to find a girl about his age, Chinese features, wearing a Stanford hoodie that looked far more expensive than his entire outfit. "First time? That obvious?" Eli asked. "You've got the deer in headlights thing happening. I'm Wei Lin, Taiwan delegation. This is my second IMO, so I remember the terror." She extended her hand with a warm smile. "Don't worry, the problems are brutal, but everyone here is just as scared as you are. They just hide it better." Eli shook her hand, grateful for the kindness. "Eli Brooks, USA. And I don't think everyone is as scared as me. I barely belong here." "If you're here, you belong," Wei Lin said firmly. "The qualification process doesn't make mistakes. Come on, let's go find the registration table before all the good seats in the orientation are taken. Not that there are good seats. We're mathematicians, not interior designers." Inside, the hall buzzed with controlled chaos. Students from 60 countries milled about, speaking in dozens of languages, their nervous energy palpable despite attempts at casual confidence. Eli spotted the American delegation leader, Dr. Sarah Martinez, who'd coached him via video calls for the past 3 months. "Eli!" She swept toward him with genuine warmth, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You made it. How was the flight?" "Eventful," Eli said, thinking of Marcus's screaming and Caleb's desperation and the surreal hours in first class. "But I'm here. That's what matters. Listen, I want to introduce you to the rest of the team." She guided him toward a cluster of American students who all looked far more put together than Eli felt. "Everyone, this is Eli Brooks, our 6th team member. Eli solved the qualifying geometry proof in under 12 minutes, which is the fastest time we've seen in 15 years. The other students offered polite nods and handshakes, but Eli could read the assessment in their eyes. His clothes were wrong, worn jeans and a hoodie that had seen better days, not the neat polos and pressed khakis the others wore. His accent was wrong. South Side Chicago, not the carefully neutral tones of expensive prep schools. Everything about him screamed outsider, and they all knew it. "Nice to meet you all," Eli said, keeping his voice steady. He'd dealt with this before. The assumption that he didn't belong, that his admission was a diversity statistic rather than earned merit. He'd prove them wrong the same way he always did, by being undeniably better at the thing that mattered. A tall boy with perfect hair and an MIT Preparatory Academy jacket extended his hand more genuinely than the others. "I'm David Chen, that geometry proof you solved? I spent 40 minutes on it and still needed a hint. Dr. Martinez showed us your solution. It was elegant as hell." "Thanks," Eli said, relaxing slightly. "Your name came up in the forms. You're the number theory specialist, right? That proof you published about prime distributions was incredible." David's expression warmed considerably. "You read that? Most people found it too abstract." "Abstract is where it gets interesting," Eli said. And just like that, they were talking mathematics, the universal language that transcended backgrounds and economics. David pulled out a tablet showing a problem he'd been working on, and within minutes they were sketching diagrams in the air with their fingers, debating approaches while the others watched with a mixture of interest and bemusement. "Okay, mathematicians," Dr. Martinez interrupted with an affectionate smile. "Save the problem-solving energy for tomorrow. Today is orientation and practice sessions. The real competition starts in 36 hours, and I need you all rested and sharp." The orientation was comprehensive and intimidating. The competition director, a severe-looking British professor named Dr. Whitmore, explained the format with military precision. 2 examination days, 3 problems each day, 4.5 hours per session. Problems ranged from geometry to number theory to algebra to combinatorics. Solutions required complete proofs, not just answers. Partial credit existed but was rare. The problems were designed by an international committee and tested the absolute limits of pre-university mathematics. Last year's competition had a 32% zero-score rate on problem 6, Dr. Whitmore announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall, meaning nearly a third of the world's best young mathematicians couldn't solve it at all. This is not an exam you prepare for by memorizing formulas. This is a test of creativity, persistence, and your ability to see connections others miss. Eli felt his palms sweat. Wei Lin, seated beside him, noticed his tension and leaned over to whisper, "He's trying to scare you. Don't let him. You've got this." But did he? Eli looked around at the other competitors, students from elite schools in Singapore, Russia, China, Korea, kids who'd been groomed for this since elementary school, who'd had private tutors and advanced courses and every advantage. And here he was, the boy who'd learned from YouTube videos watched on library computers, hoping that raw talent and desperate determination would be enough. The practice session that afternoon was brutal. Dr. Martinez distributed sample problems from previous years, and Eli tackled them with focused intensity. The first one, a combinatorics problem about arranging colored balls, took him 23 minutes. Too long. David finished it in 18. The second problem, involving polynomial functions, stumped him completely for 40 minutes until he saw the trick. A substitution so elegant it made him laugh out loud when it clicked. "That's the sound of someone getting it," Dr. Martinez said, pausing by his desk. "Talk me through it." Eli explained his solution, watching her face for reactions. When he finished, she smiled. "Perfect. That's exactly the kind of lateral thinking the IMO rewards. You didn't bash through with brute force. You found the elegant path." "Caleb said something similar," Eli murmured without thinking. "Caleb?" "Someone I met on the plane. He said I had a gift for seeing elegant solutions in chaos." Eli paused, remembering the billionaire's exhausted face, the screaming baby, the unexpected connection. He was right, I think. That's what mathematics is, finding order hidden in apparent randomness. Dr. Martinez studied him curiously. "That's a profound way to describe it. Hold on to that perspective. It'll serve you well tomorrow." That evening, Eli video called his siblings from the hostel's common area, balancing his laptop on his knees while sitting on a worn couch that smelled faintly of mildew and instant noodles. His aunt had gathered all 4 kids around her kitchen table so they could talk together. "Eli," Keisha's face filled the screen, gap-toothed smile bright. "Did you see the Queen? Are you having tea with princes?" "The Queen died a few years ago, Quiche," Jamal corrected, rolling his eyes with 13-year-old superiority. "And Eli's there for math, not tourism." I know that, Keisha shot back. I was just asking if he'd seen anything cool. I've been in lecture halls in this hostel, Eli admitted, but London is beautiful from what I've seen through windows. Maybe next time I can actually explore. When's the competition? Maya asked, always the practical one. And are you going to win? Tomorrow and the next day. And I don't know if I'll win. I just hope I don't embarrass myself. You won't, Marcus said quietly. The 11-year-old who shared his name with a billionaire's son was the sensitive one, always worried about others. You're the smartest person I know, Eli. You're going to do amazing. The confidence in his little brother's voice made Eli's throat tight. I'm going to try my best. That's all I can promise. Your best is better than most people's best, his aunt interjected, leaning into the frame. We're all proud of you, baby. Win or lose, you represented our family and our neighborhood on an international stage. That's already a victory. After they said their goodbyes, Keisha blowing kisses, Jamal giving an awkward wave, the twins promising to watch for any news coverage, Eli sat in the darkening common area and thought about pressure. Not just the competition pressure, but the weight of everyone's expectations. His siblings saw him as a hero. Mrs. Chen saw him as validation of her teaching methods. The neighborhood that had funded his trip saw him as their representative, proof that Southside kids could compete with anyone. And somewhere in London, a billionaire named Caleb Harrow was probably thinking about him too, wondering if the kid who'd calmed his baby would prove to be as brilliant at mathematics as he'd seemed on the plane. You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders, Wei Lin said, appearing from the hostel kitchen with 2 cups of tea. Want some company? Sure, Eli said, grateful for the distraction. Can't sleep? Too nervous, plus I'm on Taiwan time still, so my brain thinks it's breakfast. She handed him a cup and settled onto the adjacent couch. I've been meaning to ask, how did you get into mathematics? Most people have some origin story, like a brilliant teacher or a mathematical parent. Eli wrapped his hands around the warm cup, considering how much to share. My mom got sick when I was 10. Cancer. The treatments were expensive and we didn't have great insurance, so things got tight financially. I started looking for ways to help, and I found this website that paid small amounts for solving logic puzzles. Like 5 cents per puzzle, nothing major, but it added up. Wei Lin listened without interrupting, her expression attentive. I got really good at the puzzles, Eli continued. Fast. I could solve 50 in an hour, maybe more. That's when I realized I had something, not just the ability to solve problems, but to see patterns quickly. After my mom died and we moved in with my grandmother, I kept solving puzzles. It was escape, you know? When I was working through a problem, I didn't have to think about being sad or scared or worried about my siblings. Mathematics as therapy, Wei Lin said softly. I understand that more than you know. Eventually, the puzzles got too easy, so I started looking for harder problems. That led me to competition mathematics, and then to Mrs. Chen, my teacher, who saw something in me worth developing. She stayed after school 3 days a week for 2 years, just teaching me, helping me see how deep mathematics could go. Eli paused, remembering those afternoons in Mrs. Chen's classroom, the quiet joy of understanding spreading through him like warmth. She's the reason I'm here. She sounds like someone who believes in you, Wei Lin observed. She's someone who saw potential where others saw a poor kid who'd probably drop out to get a job, Eli said. She fought for me when the school didn't want to pay for competition fees. She wrote letters, made phone calls, basically refused to let the system ignore me. Then you'd better win a medal for her, Wei Lin said with a smile. Give her something to point at when people doubt her judgment. No pressure, right? Eli laughed, but the weight of it pressed against his chest. A medal would mean everything: scholarship opportunities, university recognition, validation that the unconventional path he'd taken was legitimate. But medals weren't guaranteed, especially not when you were competing against kids who'd been training their entire lives. They talked for another hour, trading stories about their mathematical journeys. Wei Lin's path had been more traditional: supportive parents, elite schools, private tutors, but she'd faced her own pressures. The expectation to be perfect, to never show weakness, to represent Taiwan with honor. In some ways, Eli realized, they were all carrying similar weights, just packaged differently. When he finally crawled into his hostel bunk at midnight, Eli pulled out the business cards Caleb had given him. He'd tucked them carefully into his wallet, unsure why he'd felt they were important, but certain that they were. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to the number written on the back of one card. "Hi, Mr. Harrow. This is Eli Brooks from the plane. Competition starts tomorrow. Wanted to say thank you again for everything. Hope Marcus's ear is better. Eli." He didn't expect a response. It was late, and billionaires probably didn't check their personal phones for messages from random teenagers. But 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "Eli, great to hear from you. Marcus is fully recovered. You saved us both. I've been thinking about you and the competition. You're going to do brilliantly. Remember what I said. The fear means it matters. Use it. And whatever happens, you've already proven you belong there. Good luck. Caleb." Eli read the message 3 times, feeling something warm settle in his chest. Then he set his phone aside, closed his eyes, and tried to quiet his racing mind enough to sleep. The next morning arrived with gray London skies and the weight of anticipation. Eli dressed in his cleanest clothes, dark jeans and a button-down shirt Mrs. Chen had bought him specifically for the competition, and made his way to Imperial College with the other American team members. The examination hall was vast and silent, rows of individual desks arranged with mathematical precision. Each desk held a packet of problems, face down, waiting. "You have 4.5 hours for 3 problems, Dr. Whitmore announced once all competitors were seated. "You may begin now." The rustle of papers turning filled the hall like a collective breath. Eli flipped his packet and read the first problem, his heart sinking slightly. It was a number theory problem involving divisibility and modular arithmetic, not his strongest area. He forced himself to breathe slowly, remembering Dr. Martinez's advice. Start with what you can solve. Build confidence, then tackle the harder ones. He skipped to problem 2, a geometry proof. This was more familiar territory. The problem involved circles, tangent lines, and proving a specific relationship between angles. Eli stared at the diagram, letting his mind relax into the patterns. There was something about the configuration that reminded him of a problem he'd solved 6 months ago, a similar structure with different elements. His pencil began to move, sketching auxiliary lines, marking equal angles, building toward the proof step by step. The logic flowed naturally, each statement supporting the next, until he reached the conclusion he needed. He checked his work twice, found no errors, and felt a small surge of satisfaction. 1 down. Problem 3 was combinatorics, counting problems involving arrangements and selections. Eli worked through it methodically, setting up equations, testing small cases to find patterns, then generalizing to the full solution. It took him 1 hour and 40 minutes, but when he finished, he was confident in his answer. That left problem 1, the number theory beast. Eli returned to it with 2 hours remaining, determined to extract whatever partial credit he could. He tried several approaches, each one leading to dead ends or circular logic. The clock ticked forward mercilessly. Around him, other students wrote frantically or sat frozen in thought. Some had already finished and were reviewing their work. Others looked as stuck as he felt. With 30 minutes left, Eli saw it. Not the complete solution, but a pathway. If he made a specific assumption about the remainders, proved that assumption was valid under the problem's constraints, then the rest would follow. He wrote quickly, building his argument, aware that his handwriting was getting messy in his rush, but unable to slow down. He finished the core proof with 7 minutes to spare, then used the remaining time to clean up his notation and double-check his logic. "Time," Dr. Whitmore announced, his voice cutting through the concentration like a knife. "Put down your pencils." Eli set his pencil down and leaned back, exhaling slowly. He'd done it, completed all 3 problems. Whether his solutions were correct was another question entirely, but he'd given it everything he had. Outside the examination hall, students clustered in anxious groups, comparing approaches and arguing about solutions. Eli found David Chen surrounded by other competitors, all debating problem 1. "Did you use modular arithmetic for the number theory 1? A Russian student was asking. "I tried direct proof, but got nowhere." "Modular arithmetic with a substitution," David confirmed. "Once you saw that the remainders had to form a specific pattern, the rest collapsed pretty elegantly." Eli's stomach dropped. That wasn't the approach he'd used. He'd gone a completely different direction, and now he wasn't sure if his solution was valid or if he'd made a fundamental error. "Hey, Eli," David said, noticing him. "How did you tackle problem 1? "Differently than you, apparently," Eli admitted. "I used a divisibility argument with prime factorization." David's eyebrows rose. "That's actually really clever. I didn't think of that approach. Did it work?" "I think so. I won't know until they grade it." "Well, if it's sound, it might be worth more than mine. Original approaches tend to score well if the logic holds." David clapped him on the shoulder. "How were the other two?" "Geometry felt solid. Combinatorics took me longer than it should have, but I got there." They compared notes on problems 2 and 3, and Eli felt his confidence rebuild slightly. His geometry proof matched David's almost exactly, which was reassuring. The combinatorics answer was the same, though their methods differed slightly. Maybe he hadn't completely failed. That afternoon was supposed to be rest time, but Eli couldn't relax. He walked through the Imperial College campus, trying to clear his head for tomorrow's second session. The historic buildings and manicured lawns felt like something from a movie, so different from the concrete and chain link of his Chicago neighborhood. His phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a London area code. Eli answered cautiously. "Eli? It's Caleb Harrow." Surprise jolted through him. "Mr. Harrow? I didn't expect. How did you get my number?" "You texted me last night, remember?" Caleb's voice carried warmth and amusement. "I'm actually in London on business this week. I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner tonight. I know you've got competition tomorrow, but you need to eat anyway, and I'd love to hear how today went." Eli's first instinct was to refuse. He should be studying, reviewing, preparing. But something in Caleb's tone suggested this wasn't just casual interest. And honestly, the thought of spending the evening alone in the hostel, obsessing over whether his number theory proof was valid, sounded miserable. "Dinner would be great," Eli heard himself say. "But nothing too fancy, okay? I'm not really dressed for perfect. There's a pub near your hostel called the Scholar's Rest. Very casual, excellent fish and chips. Meet me there at 7? At precisely 7 o'clock, Eli walked into the Scholar's Rest to find Caleb already seated in a corner booth, looking far more relaxed than he had on the plane. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. "No baby tonight?" Eli asked, sliding into the opposite seat. "Nanny's got him at the hotel," Caleb explained. "Elizabeth, his mother, finally made it to London, so she's taking the night shift. First time in weeks I've had an evening to myself." He paused, studying Eli's face. "You look exhausted." 4.5 hours of intense concentration will do that, Eli said. "But I survived day 1. "Tell me about it. And don't sanitize it. I want the real story, not the version you'd tell someone you're trying to impress." So Eli did. He talked about the number theory problem that had stumped him, the geometry proof that felt elegant, the combinatorics that took longer than it should have. He admitted his fear that his original approach on problem 1 might be completely wrong, that he might have missed something obvious that everyone else caught. Caleb listened without interrupting, his attention total and unwavering. When Eli finished, he said, "You know what I'm hearing? Someone who thought creatively under pressure and completed every problem despite being terrified. That's not failure, Eli. That's exactly what you're supposed to do." "But what if my solution is wrong?" "Then you learned something for tomorrow, but I'm betting it's not wrong. You see patterns others miss. You proved that on the plane with Marcus. Trust your instincts." Their food arrived, fish and chips for Eli, shepherd's pie for Caleb, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Caleb spoke again. "I've been thinking about you since the flight," he admitted, "about what you said regarding elegant solutions in chaos. I run a technology company, Eli. We're supposed to be innovative, cutting edge, solving tomorrow's problems today. But lately, I've realized we've been so focused on optimization and efficiency that we've lost sight of elegance. We're just throwing computational power at problems instead of understanding them deeply." "Brute force versus insight," Eli said, understanding immediately. "It's a common trap in mathematics too. Sometimes the hard way is actually easier than finding the clever solution." "Exactly. And I've built a company culture that rewards brute force, who can work the longest hours, who can iterate fastest, who can push products to market quickest. But watching you with Marcus, seeing how you approached his crying not as a problem to overpower, but as a puzzle to understand, Caleb trailed off, searching for words. It made me question everything. Eli wasn't sure what to say to that. The idea that his interaction with a screaming baby had influenced a billionaire's business philosophy seemed surreal. I want to offer you something, Caleb continued, his tone shifting to something more formal. Not charity, not pity, a genuine opportunity. Nexus Technologies has an internship program for exceptional students. It's competitive, paid well, and includes housing if needed. I'd like to personally sponsor your application once you graduate high school. Mr. Harrow, I appreciate that, but let me finish. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you or because you helped with Marcus, though I'm grateful for both. I'm doing this because I watched you solve an impossible problem in 5 minutes using nothing but observation and experience. That's the kind of thinking my company needs. Hell, that every company needs. And I suspect your mathematical ability translates to other kinds of problem solving too. Eli turned this over in his mind, looking for the catch, the angle, the thing that seemed too good to be true. But Caleb's expression was earnest, open, without the calculated performance Eli had learned to recognize in people who wanted something from him. Can I think about it? Eli asked finally. After the competition? I appreciate the offer, I really do, but my head's so full of mathematics right now that I can't process anything else. Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of how the competition goes, by the way. Your value doesn't change based on whether you win a medal. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between mathematics, business, parenthood, and philosophy. Caleb told stories about Nexus's early days when he'd been a 22-year-old with more ambition than sense, building software in his apartment and surviving on instant ramen. Eli shared more about his siblings, about the weight of being the oldest, about how mathematics had saved him in ways that had nothing to do with career prospects. You really love them, Caleb observed. Your siblings. The way your whole face changes when you talk about them. They're everything, Eli said simply. I'd do anything for them. That's rare. That kind of selfless love. Caleb's expression turned wistful. I hope Marcus grows up with siblings who feel that way about him. And I hope I can be the kind of father who fosters that connection rather than inadvertently creating competition and resentment. You will be, Eli said with certainty, because you're worried about it. The people who screw up parenting are the ones who never question themselves. When they parted outside the pub, Caleb pulled Eli into a brief hug that surprised them both. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you, and I'm glad our paths crossed. Me too, Eli said, meaning it completely. He walked back to the hostel feeling lighter somehow, the anxiety about tomorrow's examination balanced by something warmer and more sustaining. He'd made a friend, an unlikely one, but genuine. And more than that, he'd glimpsed a future beyond the South Side, beyond the limitations he'd always assumed were fixed and permanent. Day 2 of the competition arrived with the same gray skies and heightened tension. The problems were waiting, face down, and Eli took his seat with his heart pounding, but his mind clear. Whatever happened in the next 4.5 hours would determine so much: scholarships, opportunities, validation. But it wouldn't determine his worth. Caleb had reminded him of that, and his siblings had proven it long before the IMO existed. You may begin, Dr. Whitmore announced. Eli flipped the packet and read problem 4, and despite everything, he smiled. It was a geometry problem involving circles and tangent lines, elegant and beautiful, and exactly the kind of puzzle he loved. He picked up his pencil and began to write, finding the patterns, building the proof, one logical step at a time. In the silence of concentrated thought, surrounded by the world's brightest young mathematical minds, Eli Brooks did what he'd always done. He solved problems with creativity, persistence, and the hard-earned wisdom that elegant solutions existed even in apparent chaos. You just had to be brave enough to look for them. The geometry problem yielded to Eli's pencil like snow melting under spring sun, each line of proof flowing naturally into the next until the solution stood complete and irrefutable on his paper. He checked it twice, found it sound, and felt the first genuine surge of confidence since the competition began. This was his element, elegant patterns hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone patient enough to see them. Problem 5 was another story entirely. Eli read it 3 times, each pass filling him with increasing dread. It was a functional equation problem, asking him to find all functions that satisfied a specific set of constraints. These were notoriously difficult, requiring not just solving but proving that no other solutions existed. It was mathematical philosophy as much as calculation, and Eli had never been particularly strong with functional equations. He glanced around the hall, trying to gauge other competitors' reactions without being obvious. Most faces showed concentration, but several displayed the same dismay Eli felt. At least he wasn't alone in finding this one brutal. 2 hours into the examination, Eli had made modest progress on problem 5. Enough for partial credit, he hoped, but nowhere near a complete solution. The problem seemed to branch into infinite possibilities, each path leading to either contradiction or endless complexity. He was missing something, some key insight that would collapse the chaos into order, but it remained frustratingly out of reach. Problem 6 made problem 5 look gentle by comparison. Eli read the combinatorics question and felt his stomach drop. It involved graph theory, asking about colorings and connections in a way that seemed deliberately designed to punish anyone who hadn't spent years studying advanced discrete mathematics. This wasn't just hard, it was vicious. With 90 minutes remaining, Eli made a strategic decision. He had a solid solution for problem 4 and partial work on problem 5. Rather than bash his head against problem 6 and risk running out of time to polish what he'd already done, he focused on making his existing work as clear and complete as possible. He added explanatory notes, cleaned up his notation, and triple-checked his geometry proof for any errors. Then, with 40 minutes left, he returned to problem 6 with fresh eyes and lowered expectations. If he could demonstrate understanding of the problem and outline even a failed approach, that might be worth something. He began sketching graph structures, testing small cases, looking for patterns in how the colorings behaved under different constraints. And suddenly, impossibly, he saw it. Not the full solution that remained beyond his grasp, but a special case. If he restricted the problem to graphs with a specific structure, the question became manageable. He could prove the result for that limited class of graphs. And while it wasn't the general solution the problem demanded, it was legitimate mathematics and worth more than nothing. Eli wrote furiously, building his proof for the special case, aware that he was running out of time, but unable to stop until he'd captured the complete argument. His handwriting deteriorated into barely legible scrawl as he raced the clock, but the logic was sound, the reasoning clear, and when Dr. Whitmore called time, Eli had produced something he was genuinely proud of, even if it wasn't what the problem asked for. "Pencils down," Dr. Whitmore's voice rang out, final and absolute. Eli set his pencil down and slumped in his chair, utterly drained. Around him, other students showed similar exhaustion. Some looked devastated, others cautiously optimistic, most simply worn down by the mental marathon they'd just endured. Outside, the post-examination atmosphere was even more charged than the previous day. Students clustered in tight groups, voices rising as they debated solutions and compared approaches. Eli found Wei Lin sitting alone on a bench, staring at nothing with an expression of profound disappointment. "Hey," he said gently, sitting beside her. "How'd it go?" "Problem 6 destroyed me," she said flatly. "I spent 2 hours on it and got absolutely nowhere. Not even partial credit nowhere, like I couldn't even understand what it was asking nowhere. I'm going to have a 0 on a problem, Eli. A 0. Do you know how that looks?" "It looks like you encountered something genuinely difficult and you're human," Eli said. "I didn't solve it either. I got a special case, maybe, but nothing close to the full solution." Wei Lin turned to him with surprise. "You got something? How? That problem was impossible." "I lowered my expectations," Eli admitted. "I stopped trying to solve what they asked and started solving what I could actually manage. It's not what they wanted, but it's legitimate work." "That's actually brilliant," Wei Lin said, some life returning to her voice. "Partial credit is better than nothing. I should have thought of that instead of just sitting there paralyzed by how hard it was." David Chen appeared, looking uncharacteristically rattled. "Did anyone actually solve problem 6? Because I'm starting to think it was unsolvable, and they just put it there to mess with our heads." "I heard the Chinese team leader say one of their students got it," another American team member reported. Some prodigy named Zhang Wei, who's won basically every mathematics competition he's ever entered. But yeah, for us normal geniuses, that problem was ridiculous. The rest of the afternoon passed in anxious speculation. Students traded war stories about which problems had defeated them, which proofs they'd nailed, which approaches they'd tried. The general consensus was that day 2 had been significantly harder than day 1, and that problem 6 specifically was going to tank a lot of otherwise strong scores. Eli tried to distract himself by exploring London properly for the first time since arriving. He walked through Hyde Park, watching families feed ducks and couples stroll hand in hand, trying to absorb the normalcy of people living ordinary lives while his entire future hung in balance. His phone buzzed with messages from his siblings. Encouragement from Jamal, silly jokes from Keisha, quiet support from the twins. His aunt sent a photo of the whole family holding a sign that read, "We believe in Eli," and he had to sit down on a park bench until the wave of emotion passed. That evening, Caleb texted asking how it went, and Eli found himself typing a more honest response than he'd given anyone else. Day 2 was brutal. I think I did okay, but not great. Problem 6 might haunt my nightmares. Results won't be posted for 2 days, and I'm not sure how I'm supposed to wait that long without losing my mind. The response came quickly. Want some company? I'm free tonight. We could grab dinner and talk about anything except mathematics. They met at a small Italian restaurant in Covent Garden, tucked away from tourist crowds. Caleb had made reservations somehow, and they were seated at a quiet corner table that felt intimate, despite the bustling restaurant around them. Marcus was absent again. Elizabeth has him, Caleb explained. We're figuring out shared custody arrangements. It's complicated, but we're managing. How's his ear? Eli asked. Perfect. The antibiotics cleared it up completely. He's been sleeping peacefully ever since, which means I've been sleeping peacefully. You literally changed our lives on that plane, Eli. I'm not exaggerating. Eli shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone with experience would do. But most people don't have that experience, and the ones who do don't always choose to help. Caleb leaned forward, his expression serious. You saw a problem, you had knowledge that could solve it, and you took the risk of offering help even though you knew how you might be perceived. That takes courage, especially at your age. Or stupidity, Eli said with a half smile. I could have been arrested for approaching your baby without permission. But you weren't, because your intentions were genuine and obvious. People can sense authenticity, Eli. It's rare enough to be remarkable. Their food arrived. Pasta for Eli, risotto for Caleb, and they ate in silence for a few minutes before Caleb spoke again. I want to tell you something, and I need you to just listen without immediately dismissing it as charity or pity, okay? Eli set down his fork, wary. Okay. I've been thinking about what you said regarding your siblings, about how you had to leave them when you turned 16 because of foster care logistics. That's not right, Eli. Families shouldn't be separated because of bureaucratic systems and economic circumstances. It's just how things are, Eli said carefully. The system isn't perfect, but it's what we've got. What if it didn't have to be that way? What if there was an alternative? Caleb took a breath. I've been looking into legal guardianship options. If you're interested, and this is completely your choice, no pressure, I could petition to become your legal guardian. Not adoption, he clarified quickly, seeing Eli's expression. Your family structure stays intact, but it would give you more stability, access to resources, and potentially help you reunite with your siblings under better circumstances. Eli's mind went blank. What? I know it sounds insane, we barely know each other. But Eli, I watched you solve an impossible problem in 5 minutes, using nothing but observation and compassion. I've spent days thinking about you, about your situation, about the absurd unfairness of talent being limited by circumstances. And I have resources, significant resources, that could make a real difference in your life without changing who you are or what you want to become. Why would you do this? Eli's voice came out smaller than he intended. Why would you risk that kind of complication for someone you met on a plane? Caleb's expression softened. Because when I look at you, I see what Marcus could become if I do this right. I see intelligence, compassion, resilience, and humility all wrapped together. And I see talent that could change the world being limited by factors that have nothing to do with your ability. If I can help remove those limitations, why wouldn't I? This is crazy, Eli said, but his voice lacked conviction. His mind was already racing ahead. What would it mean to have a legal guardian who was a billionaire? What doors would open? What opportunities would become possible? And more importantly, could this somehow help him reconnect with his siblings, give them all a better situation? It is crazy, Caleb agreed, but most of the best decisions in my life have been crazy at first. Starting Nexus was crazy. Having Marcus with Elizabeth when our relationship was already failing was crazy. Offering my personal phone number to a teenager on a plane was crazy. But here we are. I need time to think about this, Eli said slowly. It's a lot. And I need to understand what you're actually offering, what the implications are, what happens if it doesn't work out. Of course. Take all the time you need. Talk to your aunt, your siblings, people you trust. I'm not trying to pressure you into anything. I just wanted you to know the option exists. They finished dinner with the weight of Caleb's offer hanging between them, too massive to fully process but impossible to ignore. Eli's brain kept circling back to it. Legal guardianship, resources, stability, opportunity. It felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning, and his instinct was to grab it while simultaneously questioning whether it was real or whether he deserved it. Back at the hostel, Eli lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything. The competition, Caleb's offer, the future stretching ahead of him in 1,000 uncertain directions. He pulled out his phone and called his aunt, needing her wisdom. "Baby, it's 3 in the morning here," she answered groggily. "Is everything okay?" "I need advice," Eli said. "Something happened, and I don't know what to do." He explained everything: the flight, Marcus's crying, Caleb's help, the dinner conversations, and finally the guardianship offer. His aunt listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "This man," she said finally. "You trust him?" "I think so. He hasn't asked for anything from me. He's been kind, and his offer seems genuine. But it feels too good to be true, like there has to be a catch, some angle I'm not seeing." His aunt sighed, and Eli heard exhaustion and wisdom in equal measure. "Baby, I'm going to tell you something my mother told me when I was your age. Sometimes good things happen, not because you earned them or because there's some cosmic balance, but just because someone decided to be kind. And you can spend your whole life being suspicious of kindness, or you can accept it gracefully and pay it forward when you're able. But what if this changes me? What if I become someone different, someone my mom wouldn't recognize?" "Eli Brooks, your mama raised you to be compassionate and smart and determined. Those things don't change because your circumstances improve. You'll still be you, just with better opportunities to become who you're meant to be." "What about you and the kids? What if this means I'm abandoning them?" "You could never abandon them. They love you and they want what's best for you. If this man can help you, really help you, then that helps all of us. Maybe it means you can help them better later. Maybe it means they see what's possible when you work hard and catch a lucky break." She paused. "And baby, you deserve a lucky break. You've carried so much for so long. Let someone else carry some of it for a while." After they hung up, Eli felt marginally better, but still unsettled. He texted Caleb, keeping it brief. "Thank you for dinner and for the offer. I'm thinking about it seriously. Can we talk more after the results are posted?" The response came immediately. "Absolutely. No rush. Focus on taking care of yourself these next few days. Proud of you regardless of what the results say." The following day was designated for sightseeing and relaxation, while the examination committees graded submissions. The American team visited the British Museum, where Eli found himself drawn to the mathematics sections, ancient counting systems, early geometric proofs, the evolution of mathematical notation across cultures. Math was universal, he realized, transcending language and time and economic circumstances. A brilliant insight was brilliant whether it came from an ancient Greek philosopher or a Southside kid teaching himself from YouTube videos. Waylin found him studying a display about the history of zero. "Deep thoughts?" she asked. "Just thinking about how mathematics is maybe the most democratic thing humans have created," Eli said. "A proof is either valid or it isn't, regardless of who discovers it or where they come from." "That's beautiful," Waylin said. And also slightly depressing because it means I can't blame my 0 on problem 6 on anything except my own inability to solve it. They explored the museum together, joined eventually by David and a few other competitors who'd formed friendships over shared mathematical trauma. The conversation flowed easily between mathematics, culture, future plans, and the universal anxieties of being 16 and trying to figure out what came next. "Where are you hoping to go to university?" David asked Eli as they examined ancient astronomical instruments. "Depends on scholarships," Eli admitted. "MIT would be amazing, but so would anywhere with a strong math program and financial aid. I'm trying to keep my expectations flexible." "With your IMO performance, you'll have options," David said confidently. "Even if you didn't win a medal, and I think you probably did, just qualifying is huge. Universities know that." "What about you?" Eli asked. "MIT, probably. My parents both went there, and I've been groomed for it since birth." David's tone carried a mixture of pride and resignation. "Sometimes I wonder what I'd choose if I actually had a choice, Like, what if I wanted to study literature or philosophy instead of mathematics? Do you want to study those things?" "No, not really. I love math, but I wonder if I'd love it as much if it wasn't expected of me." David shrugged. "Different problems than yours, I guess, but still problems." Eli understood what he was saying, that privilege came with its own pressures, its own cage of expectations. It didn't make his own struggles less real, but it reminded him that everyone carried something, visible or not. That evening, Eli video called his siblings again. They bombarded him with questions about London, about the competition, about everything he'd seen and done. Keisha wanted to know if he'd met any princesses. Jamal asked if the food was weird. The twins asked careful questions about how he was feeling, reading between the lines of his answers to gauge his emotional state. "I met someone," Eli found himself saying. "A man named Caleb Harrow. He's offered to help me, to become my legal guardian and provide support so I can focus on school and mathematics." "Is he safe?" Maya asked immediately, protective instincts sharp. "You don't really know him." "I think so. My gut says he's genuine, but I'm being careful, I promise." "Will you still see us?" Marcus asked quietly, and the fear in his voice broke Eli's heart. "Of course I will. Nothing could stop me from seeing you guys. This would just mean I have more stability, more resources to help all of us." Eli paused, choosing his words carefully. "And maybe it means I can help you guys more later, when I'm in a better position." His aunt appeared in the frame, having clearly been listening from the kitchen. "Your brother is considering an opportunity that could change his life," she told the kids. "We're going to support him, understand? Whatever he decides, we're proud of him." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Eli could see the worry on his siblings' faces. They were afraid of losing him, of the changes that might come. He understood that fear intimately. It was his fear too, the terror that accepting help meant losing something essential about himself or his connection to them. The next day arrived with the weight of impending results. The organizers had announced that scores would be posted at 2 p.m. local time on the competition website and displayed physically at Imperial College. Eli spent the morning in a fog of anxiety, unable to eat breakfast, checking his phone obsessively, even though nothing would be posted early. At 1:30 p.m., competitors began gathering at Imperial College, clustering around the building where results would be displayed. The energy was electric with nervous anticipation. Some students looked confident, others terrified, most somewhere in between. The American team stood together, a tight unit of shared anxiety. "Whatever happens," Dr. Martinez said to her team, "I want you all to know I'm proud of you. You represented the United States with intelligence and integrity. That matters more than any individual score." "Easy to say when you're not waiting to find out if you failed," one team member muttered. But there was no real hostility in it, just nerves. At precisely 2 p.m., an organizer emerged and began posting sheets of paper on a large board. The crowd surged forward, everyone trying to see where they'd placed, what they'd scored, whether their nightmares or hopes had come true. Eli forced himself to wait, letting others check first, afraid of what he might find. He watched reactions, tears of joy, devastated expressions, shocked disbelief, relieved smiles. The full spectrum of human emotion played out in front of him. "Eli!" David grabbed his arm, his face bright with excitement. Eli, you need to look. Now. How bad is it? Eli asked, bracing himself. Bad? Are you kidding? You need to look. Eli pushed through the crowd to the board, scanning the sheets for the American team results. His eyes found his name tracked across to his scores on individual problems, and he stopped breathing. Problem 1, 7 points out of 7. Full credit. Problem 2, 7 points out of 7. Full credit. Problem 3, 7 points out of 7. Full credit. Problem 4, 7 points out of 7. Full credit. Problem 5, 5 points out of 7. Substantial partial credit. Problem 6, 4 points out of 7. Credit for his special case solution. Total, 37 points out of 42. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. That score wasn't just good, it was exceptional. He scanned the overall rankings, looking for where he'd placed among all competitors. His name appeared on the first page, near the top, in the gold medal range. You got a gold medal, Wei Lin said beside him, her voice filled with genuine happiness despite her own silver medal result. Eli, you got a gold medal. Do you understand what that means? He understood, but he couldn't quite believe it. Eli Brooks, from the south side of Chicago, who'd learned mathematics from YouTube videos and library computers, who'd raised his siblings while teaching himself to solve problems that stumped professional mathematicians, he'd placed in the top 12% of the world's best young mathematical minds. My number theory solution worked, he said dumbly, staring at the score sheet. My original approach on problem 1 actually worked. It more than worked, David said, appearing at his other side. According to Dr. Martinez, the graders specifically noted your solution as one of the most creative they'd seen. You did something completely different from everyone else and nailed it. Around him, the American team was celebrating. All 6 members had medaled, 4 silvers, 1 bronze, and Eli's gold. Dr. Martinez was crying happy tears, hugging each of them in turn. When she reached Eli, she held him at arm's length and looked him directly in the eyes. You are extraordinary, she said firmly. Not just talented, extraordinary. You proved that intelligence and creativity matter more than privilege or expensive preparation. I cannot wait to see what you do next. Eli's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out to find messages flooding in. His aunt, his siblings, Mrs. Chen, even a few classmates who'd somehow heard the news already. But the one that made him smile was from Caleb. I knew it. Congratulations, Eli. You deserve every bit of this. Call me when you can. I want to hear everything. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations, photographs, and official ceremonies. The medal ceremony itself was formal and moving, standing on stage with the other gold medalists, countries' anthems playing, receiving the actual physical medal that represented years of work and sacrifice. Eli's hands shook as the medal was placed around his neck, the weight of it both literal and metaphorical. That evening, there was an official reception for all competitors and their families. Eli attended alone, his only family an ocean away, but he found himself surrounded by friends he'd made during the competition. Wei Lin introduced him to her parents, who congratulated him warmly in accented English. David's family insisted on taking a photo with him, treating him like a celebrity. Even competitors from other countries who'd heard about his creative solutions approached to shake his hand and ask about his methods. He slipped away from the reception around 8, needing air and space to process everything. Outside Imperial College, the London evening was cool and clear, the historic buildings lit against the darkening sky. Eli sat on a bench and pulled out his phone, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. He'd done it. Despite everything, poverty, instability, lost opportunities, systemic barriers, he'd competed with the world's best and proven he belonged. He'd earned recognition not as a charity case or a diversity statistic, but as a brilliant mathematician in his own right. His phone rang. Caleb. Hello? Eli answered, his voice rough with emotion. Congratulations, Caleb said warmly. Gold medal, creative solutions, everything. I'm so proud of you, Eli. Thank you for everything. The dinners, the support, the belief in me. I didn't do anything. You did this. But you helped me believe I could. Eli took a breath. About your offer. The guardianship thing, I want to talk about it seriously. I want to understand exactly what you're proposing and what it would mean. Of course. I'm in London for 2 more days. We could meet tomorrow, go through everything with a lawyer if you want. Make sure you're completely comfortable with the arrangement before making any decisions. Okay, tomorrow. But Caleb? Yes? Whatever we decide, I want you to know something. You saw me when I was invisible. You treated me like I mattered when I was just some random kid from economy class. That gift, that respect, it changed how I see myself. The medal is amazing, but that matters more. There was a pause on the other end, and when Caleb spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. You were never invisible, Eli. You were just surrounded by people who weren't paying attention. But I'm paying attention now, and I'm going to make sure the right people pay attention too. Your story, your real story, not some simplified inspiration narrative, deserves to be heard. After they hung up, Eli sat for a long time on that bench, the gold medal cool against his chest, the London night settling around him like a promise. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions and complicated conversations. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply be a 16-year-old who'd achieved something extraordinary, who'd proven that elegant solutions existed even in chaos, and who'd found unexpected allies in impossible places. The crying had stopped on that plane, but something else had begun, a connection that transcended the moment, a recognition that changed trajectories, a bridge between worlds that shouldn't have touched but did. And standing on that bridge, looking toward a future that suddenly held possibilities he'd never dared imagine, Eli Brooks understood that sometimes the most important problems we solve aren't mathematical at all. They're human, messy, and elegant in ways that numbers could never capture. The lawyer's office occupied the top floor of a glass building in central London, all polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that made Eli feel simultaneously small and exposed. He sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, across from Caleb and a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Ashworth, who specialized in family law and guardianship arrangements. "Before we begin," Victoria said, her British accent crisp and professional, "I want to make absolutely clear that this meeting is for informational purposes only. You're under no obligation to agree to anything, Mr. Brooks. My job is to ensure you understand exactly what's being proposed and what your rights are." "Thank you," Eli said, grateful for the clarity. He'd barely slept the previous night, his mind cycling through possibilities and fears in equal measure. "Mr. Harrow has explained the situation," Victoria continued, opening a folder filled with documents. "He's proposing to become your legal guardian through a process called voluntary guardianship. This is different from adoption. Your family relationships remain intact and your biological connections aren't severed. Instead, Mr. Harrow would have legal authority to make decisions regarding your education, health care, and general welfare until you reach the age of majority." "What does that mean practically?" Eli asked. "Like day-to-day?" "It means you'd have a legal guardian who can sign school forms, authorize medical treatment, provide housing and financial support, and generally fulfill the role typically held by a parent," Victoria explained. "Mr. Harrow has expressed interest in ensuring you have stable housing, access to educational opportunities, and resources to pursue your academic goals without financial stress." Eli looked at Caleb, who'd been quiet since they arrived. "Why are you really doing this?" Caleb met his gaze steadily. "Because I have resources I didn't earn through any particular virtue. I was born into circumstances that gave me advantages, and I built on those advantages. You have talent that's being limited by circumstances you also didn't choose. This isn't charity, Eli. It's correction of an arbitrary imbalance." "But you barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brilliant, compassionate, and resilient. I know you see problems others miss and solve them with creativity rather than brute force. I know you care deeply about your family and that you've sacrificed your own comfort for their well-being." Caleb leaned forward. "And I know that if I don't help you, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what you could have become if you'd had the same advantages my son will have simply by being born to me." Victoria cleared her throat gently. "There are practical considerations to discuss. Mr. Brooks, where would you live? What arrangements would be made regarding your current foster placement? And most importantly, what contact would you maintain with your siblings and extended family?" "I've thought about that," Caleb said. "Eli could live in my Chicago residence when I'm based there, which is about 40% of the time. When I'm in San Francisco or traveling, he could stay with a carefully vetted household manager I employ, or if he prefers, arrangements could be made for him to stay with his aunt and siblings during those periods. The goal is stability and support, not separation from his family. You have a house in Chicago? Eli asked, surprised. A condo, technically. Gold Coast area. I maintain residences in several cities where Nexus has offices. Chicago is one of them. Caleb pulled out his phone and showed Eli photos. A spacious, modern apartment with views of Lake Michigan, multiple bedrooms, a study lined with books. You'd have your own room, your own space, and your siblings would be welcome to visit whenever you want. Eli's mind raced. The Gold Coast was maybe 40 minutes from the south side, close enough to see his family regularly, but a world away in every other sense. What about school? Your choice entirely, Caleb said. You could continue at your current high school if you want to stay with familiar teachers and friends. Or if you'd prefer, there are excellent private schools in Chicago that would welcome an IMO gold medalist. Either way, I'd ensure you have access to advanced mathematics resources, tutoring if needed, and preparation for university applications. Private school, Eli repeated slowly, testing how the words felt. That's not me. I'm not a private school kid. You're whoever you choose to be, Victoria interjected. Social class isn't destiny, Mr. Brooks. It's circumstances. And circumstances can change. But I don't want to change who I am, Eli said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. I don't want to become someone who forgets where he came from or looks down on people who don't have advantages. Then don't, Caleb said simply. I'm not offering to change your character, Eli. I'm offering to change your circumstances. What you do with those changed circumstances is entirely up to you. They spent the next 2 hours going through details. Legal paperwork, timelines, what would happen if the arrangement didn't work out, financial provisions, educational plans. Victoria was thorough to the point of exhaustion, making sure Eli understood every aspect before signing anything. By the end, Eli's head throbbed with information overload. I need to think about it, he said finally. And I need to talk to my family. This affects all of them, not just me. Of course, Caleb said. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of your decision timeline. After the meeting, Caleb suggested lunch, but Eli declined. He needed space, air, time to process everything without Caleb's earnest generosity making him feel obligated. He walked through London for hours, the gold medal still in his backpack, the weight of decisions pressing down on him like physical force. His phone rang. Mrs. Chen. Eli! Her voice was bright with joy. I heard the news. Gold medal. I knew you could do it. Thank you, Eli said, genuine warmth flooding through him. I couldn't have done it without you. All those after-school sessions, all the problems you found for me. You did the work, Mrs. Chen interrupted firmly. I just opened doors. You walked through them. I'm so proud of you, Eli. Your mother would be so proud. The mention of his mother made Eli's throat tight. I wish she could have seen it. She sees it, Mrs. Chen said with quiet certainty. I believe that. And now tell me, what comes next? Have you heard from universities yet? MIT has been asking about you. MIT. Eli stopped walking. How do they even know about me already? IMO results are watched closely by top mathematics programs. I've already received 3 emails from admissions officers asking for information about you. Stanford, Princeton, and MIT. They're interested, Eli. Very interested. I can't afford any of those schools, Eli said automatically. With your IMO performance, they'll offer full scholarships, need-based aid, whatever it takes to get you. Trust me on this. Mrs. Chen paused. But there's something else. I can hear it in your voice. What's going on? Eli found himself telling her everything. The flight, Marcus, Caleb's offer, the guardianship proposal, his fears about changing and losing himself. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Do you trust this man? She asked finally. I think so. He hasn't given me any reason not to. And do you think accepting his help would compromise your integrity or your connection to your family? I don't know, Eli admitted. That's what scares me. Then let me tell you what I see, Mrs. Chen said. I see a brilliant young man who's been carrying impossible weight since he was 11 years old. I see someone who's never had the luxury of just being a student, just being a kid, because circumstances forced him to be parent and provider and protector all at once. And I see an opportunity for that weight to be shared, for you to have space to become who you're meant to be without constantly fighting for survival. But what if I become someone my mom wouldn't recognize? Eli, your mother wanted you to be happy and successful and kind. Those things aren't mutually exclusive with having opportunities. If anything, having security might allow you to be more generous, more helpful, more of the person she raised you to be. Mrs. Chen's voice softened. Don't let fear of changing prevent you from growing. They're not the same thing. After they hung up, Eli sat on a bench in Regent's Park and watched children play football while their parents looked on. Normal lives, normal problems, normal advantages taken for granted. He thought about his siblings growing up in his aunt's crowded apartment, sharing rooms and resources and hand-me-down everything. He thought about the fundraiser that had sent him to London, kind people donating $5 and $10 and $20 because they believed in him. He thought about his mother, who'd worked 2 jobs while fighting cancer because she'd refused to let her children see her give up. What would she want him to do? The answer came with surprising clarity. She'd want him to grab the opportunity with both hands. She'd sacrificed everything so her children could have better chances than she'd had. Refusing help because of pride or fear would dishonor that sacrifice. Eli pulled out his phone and called his aunt, catching her during her lunch break at the grocery store where she worked. "Baby, how are you?" she answered. "I've been waiting to hear from you. Gold medal. We're all so proud." "Thank you. Auntie, I need to talk about something serious." He explained Caleb's offer again, with more detail this time. His aunt listened, asking careful questions about safety, intentions, legal protections. When Eli finished, she sighed deeply. "You know I love you like my own son," she said, "and you know I'd keep you here with us forever if I could. But Eli, this opportunity, it could change your life. It could give you the foundation to help your siblings later, to be the success your mama dreamed you'd be. But what about you guys? I don't want to abandon. You're not abandoning anyone. You're accepting help so you can become strong enough to help others. That's not selfish, baby. That's smart." She paused. "And between you and me, knowing you're somewhere stable with resources and support would take a weight off my chest I've been carrying since you went into separate placement. I worry about you constantly. This would let me worry less." "I'm scared," Eli admitted. "Good. Big decisions should be scary, but don't let fear make you small. Your mama wasn't small, and she didn't raise small children." That evening, Eli met Caleb at a quiet restaurant near his hotel. Marcus was there too, sleeping peacefully in a carrier next to the table, his tiny face relaxed in dreams. Eli studied the baby who'd inadvertently changed everything, marveling at how such a small person could have such massive impact. "I've made a decision," Eli said once they'd ordered, "but I have conditions." Caleb set down his menu, giving Eli his complete attention. "I'm listening." "First, I stay at my current school for senior year. I know you mentioned private schools, but my friends are at my school. Mrs. Chen is there, and I don't want to uproot everything in my final year." "Agreed." "Second, I see my siblings every week, non-negotiable. And they're welcome at your place whenever, not just when it's convenient." "Absolutely. I meant what I said about that." "Third, this arrangement ends immediately if either of us feels it's not working. No guilt, no pressure, just honest acknowledgement and a clean break if needed. Fair." "And fourth," Eli took a breath, "I want to contribute something. I don't want to be a charity case. Maybe I work part-time for Nexus or do tutoring or something, but I need to feel like I'm earning at least part of this." Caleb considered this carefully. "I understand the instinct, and I respect it. But Eli, you're going to be in your senior year applying to universities, potentially competing in more mathematics competitions. That's a full plate. How about this? You contribute by being a mentor to other students in similar situations. Once you're settled, we set up a program through Nexus that connects talented kids from underserved areas with resources and support. You help design it, help run it, help identify students who need what you needed. That's your contribution." Eli felt something catch in his chest. A program like that could change lives, could be the intervention he'd never had. That's, yes, yes, I could do that. Then we have a deal? Caleb extended his hand across the table. Eli looked at that hand, manicured, confident, attached to a man who'd seen potential where others saw problems. He thought about his mother, about Mrs. Chen, about his siblings watching to see what choices he'd make. He thought about elegant solutions hiding in chaos, about having the courage to reach for them even when the path was uncertain. He shook Caleb's hand. We have a deal. The paperwork took 2 weeks to process. Eli returned to Chicago as an IMO gold medalist and found himself unexpectedly famous in mathematical circles. MIT sent a formal letter expressing serious interest in his application. Stanford called personally. Princeton's mathematics department chair emailed offering to discuss their program, but the attention that meant the most came from his neighborhood. Someone had made a banner, "Congratulations, Eli Brooks, IMO gold medalist," and hung it in the community center where he'd spent countless hours studying. Local news did a story about the South Side kid who'd conquered international mathematics. Mrs. Chen framed his medal and put it in the school's trophy case, right next to the football and basketball achievements. You showed them, she said, standing beside him as they looked at the display. Every person who doubted you, every system that tried to limit you, you showed them what South Side brilliance looks like. Moving into Caleb's condo felt surreal. Eli brought one duffel bag of clothes and his battered backpack to a space that had more square footage than his aunt's entire apartment. His room had its own bathroom, a desk by the window overlooking Lake Michigan, and a bookshelf Caleb had already stocked with advanced mathematics texts. I wasn't sure what level you'd need, Caleb said, watching Eli examine the books. So I asked a mathematics professor at University of Chicago for recommendations. If they're not right, we can exchange them. Eli pulled out a book on algebraic topology, flipping through pages filled with complex diagrams and proofs. These are graduate-level texts. Too advanced? Perfect, Eli said softly. Absolutely perfect. The first dinner with his siblings in the new place was chaotic and emotional. Keisha ran through the rooms exclaiming about everything. Jamal tried to play it cool but couldn't hide his amazement at the view. The twins explored quietly, testing furniture and examining books like they were in a museum. You really live here? Marcus asked, his voice small. This is really yours. It's really mine, Eli confirmed. And it's yours too, whenever you want. Caleb said you guys can visit any time. His aunt walked through the space with tears in her eyes, touching the marble countertops and the soft leather furniture like she couldn't quite believe they were real. Your mama would be so happy, she whispered to Eli. So proud of the man you're becoming. School resumed in September, and Eli found himself navigating two worlds that didn't quite connect. His mornings started in a luxury condo with a kitchen full of food he didn't have to worry about affording. His days were spent at his Southside High School, where most students were still struggling with the same economic pressures he'd left behind. The disconnect was jarring and sometimes painful. You're different now, one of his classmates said during lunch, and it wasn't entirely a compliment. I'm the same person, Eli protested, with a billionaire guardian and a gold medal and MIT calling you. Yeah, totally the same. Mrs. Chen found him after school looking troubled. What's wrong? I don't fit anymore, Eli admitted. Here or there. I'm too poor for Caleb's world and too privileged now for my old world. I'm stuck in between, not belonging anywhere. You're building a bridge, Mrs. Chen corrected gently, between worlds that don't usually touch. That's uncomfortable, but it's also powerful. Don't underestimate what you're doing just by existing in both spaces. Caleb helped him design the mentorship program they discussed, and by October, the Nexus Mathematical Talent Initiative was accepting applications. The program would identify gifted mathematics students from underserved areas and provide them with tutoring, competition preparation, application support, and small scholarships for educational expenses. Eli reviewed applications personally, recognizing his own story and dozens of talented kids who just needed someone to see them. This one, he said to Caleb, pointing at an application from a 13-year-old girl in Detroit who taught herself calculus from library books. She's brilliant. We need to help her. Then we will, Caleb said simply, And Eli felt the power of those words. They could help. He could help. The resources he'd never had were now available to others because he'd been brave enough to accept help himself. His relationship with Caleb evolved from awkward formality to genuine friendship. They had standing dinner nights where they'd discuss everything from mathematics to philosophy to Caleb's business challenges. Eli found himself offering perspectives that Caleb valued, approaching problems with the lateral thinking that had won him the gold medal. "You see things I miss," Caleb admitted one evening. "Maybe because you've had to solve problems with limited resources for so long. You're creative by necessity, and that's more valuable than any business school could teach." Marcus, the baby, not Eli's brother, was growing quickly, and Eli found himself becoming unexpectedly attached to the infant who'd started everything. He'd watch Caleb parent with a mixture of admiration and analysis, noting what worked and what didn't, filing away lessons for his own future. "You're good with him," Caleb observed one Saturday when Eli had volunteered to watch Marcus while Caleb took a call. "Natural." "Practice," Eli said, bouncing Marcus gently. "I've been doing this since I was 11. "I know, and I'm sorry you had to, but I'm grateful for what it taught you because it means you can teach me." Caleb paused. "I'm serious, Eli. You're a better parent than I am in a lot of ways. You understand instinctively what I have to learn deliberately." The comment stayed with Eli for days. He'd always seen his caregiving experience as burden, as stolen childhood, as unfair responsibility. But maybe it was also strength, wisdom, capability. Maybe the things that had made his life harder had also made him more complete as a person. University applications consumed November and December. Eli applied to MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Chicago, and Berkeley. All schools that had expressed interest and offered generous financial aid packages. His essays focused not on overcoming poverty, but on seeing patterns, solving problems, finding elegance in chaos. He wrote about the plane, about Marcus's crying, about how mathematics and compassion weren't separate domains, but interconnected ways of understanding the world. "This is beautiful," Caleb said, reading one of his essays. "Really beautiful. You're not just smart, Eli. You're wise. There's a difference." Acceptance letters started arriving in March. MIT came first, with a full scholarship and a personal note from the mathematics department chair. Stanford followed, equally generous. Princeton sent a package so comprehensive it included housing stipends and research funding. Chicago offered a full ride plus a guaranteed position in their undergraduate research program. "You did it," his aunt said, reading the letters spread across Caleb's dining table, while his siblings looked on with a mixture of pride and confusion. "You really did it, baby. You're going to one of the best universities in the world." "We're all going to visit," Keisha announced firmly. "Right? When Eli's at college, we can visit?" "Absolutely," Caleb assured her. "Whatever school he chooses, we'll make sure you guys get to see him and see the campus. This is a family achievement." Eli chose MIT, drawn by their mathematics program and the community of brilliant minds. The decision felt right in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Not just prestigious, not just generous, but aligned with who he was becoming. The day he committed, Caleb opened a bottle of champagne while Eli's siblings drank sparkling cider, and they toasted to futures and possibilities and the courage it took to reach for them. "I have something for you," Caleb said, pulling out a small wrapped box. "For getting through this year, for taking the risk of accepting help, for everything." Inside was a watch, elegant but not ostentatious, with an inscription on the back. "For seeing elegant solutions in chaos. Proud of you. Th." "Caleb, I can't accept this," Eli started, but Caleb held up his hand. "You can and you will, because part of accepting help is accepting that people want to celebrate you. Let them." That night, after his family had gone home and the condo was quiet, Eli stood by the window looking out at Lake Michigan. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered stars, and somewhere out there his siblings were sleeping in his aunt's apartment, dreaming their own dreams. He thought about the boy he'd been a year ago, terrified, limited, certain his talent would never be enough to overcome his circumstances. He thought about the plane, about Caleb's desperate face, about choosing compassion over fear. One decision, made in a moment, had changed everything. But it wasn't just helping Marcus that mattered. It was being willing to be seen, to step forward into first class despite knowing he didn't belong there, to risk rejection for the possibility of connection. That courage, more than any mathematical brilliance, had opened doors he'd never imagined existed. His phone buzzed. A text from Wei Lin, his friend from the IMO, now studying at Stanford. Heard you chose MIT. Boston's not far from Stanford. Let's visit each other and solve impossible problems. Eli smiled and replied, already looking forward to it. Thanks for being there during the competition. Thanks for showing me that belonging isn't about where you start. It's about where you're brave enough to go. He set his phone down and touched the gold medal hanging on his wall next to a photo of his mother, Mrs. Chen's graduation gift, and the banner from his neighborhood community center. All of it together, his past, his present, his future, woven into something cohesive and meaningful. Elegant solutions existed in chaos. You just had to be brave enough to look for them, wise enough to accept help when it was offered, and strong enough to remain yourself while your circumstances transformed. Eli had done all three, and he was only beginning to understand what that would mean for the rest of his life. The crying had stopped long ago, but the connection it created kept expanding, touching more lives, creating more possibilities, proving that sometimes the most important mathematics happened in the spaces between people rather than on paper. And that was a proof worth more than any medal could ever represent. 5 years passed like water through fingers, each moment distinct yet flowing seamlessly into the next, transforming the boy who'd calmed a screaming baby into a man who was changing the world in ways both subtle and profound. Eli stood in front of 300 people at the Nexus Technologies annual conference, his MIT doctoral candidate credentials displayed on the massive screen behind him, and tried not to think about how surreal this moment was. The presentation he was about to give would either validate 5 years of work or reveal that he'd been chasing an elegant solution that didn't actually exist. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, please welcome Eli Brooks, who will be presenting his research on algorithmic pattern recognition in chaotic systems, with applications to everything from weather prediction to financial markets to, well, you'll see. Eli? Eli took the stage to polite applause, his hand steady despite the stakes. In the front row, Caleb sat with Marcus, now 6 years old and fidgeting in his seat, offering an encouraging nod. 2 rows back, Mrs. Chen had flown in from Chicago specifically for this presentation. And in the back, visible through the video feed, his siblings watched via live stream, Jamal, now 18 and headed to college himself, the twins preparing for their junior year, Keisha growing into a brilliant young woman with her own mathematical talents. 5 years ago, Eli began, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, I was on a plane when I solved a problem that seemed impossible. A baby was crying, and nobody could figure out why. The solution turned out to be simple once you looked at the right patterns: ear infection, pressure changes, specific positioning. But what interested me wasn't just solving that particular problem. It was understanding why some people see patterns others miss, and whether we could teach machines to do the same thing. He advanced his slide to show a complex algorithm, color-coded and annotated. What you're looking at is a neural network I developed that doesn't just process data, it looks for what I call elegant solutions. Rather than brute-forcing every possible answer, it searches for patterns that suggest underlying simplicity in apparently chaotic systems. It's inspired by how human insight works, how mathematicians find proofs, how someone with experience can diagnose a problem in seconds that others spend hours failing to solve. The presentation flowed naturally from there. Eli walked them through test cases. Weather systems where his algorithm had predicted storm behavior more accurately than conventional models. Financial data where it had identified market patterns invisible to traditional analysis. Even medical diagnostics where it had caught diseases earlier than standard protocols. The results weren't just good, they were revolutionary. The key insight, Eli explained, warming to his subject, is that chaos isn't random, it's complex, but it follows rules. And if you look for elegance rather than exhaustiveness, you can find solutions faster and more reliably. This has applications in any field where you're dealing with systems too complex for traditional linear approaches. During the question period, a skeptical venture capitalist in the third row raised his hand. This sounds incredible, almost too incredible. How do we know your algorithm isn't just overfitting to your test data? How do we know it'll work in real-world scenarios it hasn't been trained on? Eli smiled, anticipating this question. Great question. Let me show you something we did last week that wasn't in my prepared presentation. He pulled up a new slide showing real-time data. This is live feed from Chicago's Emergency Services Dispatch System. We've been running my algorithm in parallel with their standard protocols for the past 6 months, with their permission. Watch what happens when a 911 call comes in. The screen showed a call being processed, location, type of emergency, standard response protocol. Then Eli's algorithm overlaid its analysis, suggesting not just what resources to send, but what underlying patterns the call suggested, what complications to anticipate, what elegant solutions existed beyond standard procedure. 3 minutes ago, Eli said, there was a call about a child having a seizure. Standard protocol dispatched an ambulance. My algorithm noticed patterns in the call metadata, similar calls from the same address over the past year, specific medical history flags, and suggested this might be a case of undiagnosed epilepsy rather than acute emergency. Paramedics arrived prepared with that hypothesis, confirmed it immediately, and provided appropriate treatment instead of wasting time on generic emergency response. That child is getting better care because an algorithm learned to see patterns the way a very experienced emergency dispatcher might, but faster and more consistently. The auditorium erupted in murmurs. The venture capitalists leaned back, reassessing. Eli saw Caleb's proud smile, saw Mrs. Chen dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, saw Marcus wiggling in his seat trying to understand why everyone was suddenly excited. The truth is, Eli continued once the noise died down, this algorithm exists because 5 years ago, someone saw a pattern in me that I didn't see in myself. Someone recognized that finding elegant solutions wasn't just a mathematical skill, it was a way of approaching problems that could be formalized, taught, and scaled. This technology isn't mine alone. It's the result of collaboration, mentorship, and the belief that talent exists everywhere but opportunity doesn't. My job has been to create technology that helps more people access the kinds of insights that used to require years of experience or exceptional luck. After the presentation, Eli was swarmed by interested parties, investors wanting to fund commercial applications, researchers wanting to collaborate, companies wanting to license the technology. He handled each conversation with the same patient attention, never dismissing anyone, always looking for the elegant solution that would serve everyone's interests. Caleb finally extracted him from the crowd, Marcus holding Eli's hand and tugging impatiently. Eli, can we go now? You promised we'd get ice cream after your boring talk. It wasn't boring, Eli protested, laughing. It was groundbreaking artificial intelligence research. It had too many graphs, Marcus declared with 6-year-old authority. Ice cream has no graphs. That's better. They went to a small shop near the convention center, just the 3 of them, and sat in a corner booth while Marcus demolished a sundae with impressive efficiency. Caleb studied Eli with an expression that held pride and something deeper, something almost paternal despite them being separated by less than 2 decades. You know what you've done, right? Caleb said quietly. You haven't just created impressive technology. You've proven a philosophy. You've shown that the best solutions come from understanding problems deeply rather than throwing resources at them. That's going to change how people approach everything from business to social policy to education. I just formalized what I learned from necessity, Eli said, uncomfortable as always with excessive praise. When you don't have resources, you learn to see patterns. When you've raised babies on a limited budget, you learn to diagnose problems quickly. The algorithm just captures that kind of thinking. Don't minimize it, Caleb said firmly, and don't minimize yourself. You took lived experience and transformed it into something scalable and universal. That's genius, Eli. Real genius. Marcus, chocolate smeared across his face, looked up from his sundae. Eli, are you famous now? Like superhero famous? Not quite, Eli said, ruffling the boy's hair. More like nerd famous. Very different. But you're going to help lots of people, right? Dad said your computer thing will help people like how you helped me when I was a baby and I was crying on the plane. Eli met Caleb's eyes, both of them recognizing the full circle moment. Yeah, buddy, that's exactly right. I'm trying to help people the same way, just with computers instead of holding babies. That's good, Marcus declared, returning to his ice cream with the matter settled to his satisfaction. That evening, Eli video called his siblings from his apartment near MIT, a modest space, comfortable but not ostentatious, filled with books and mathematical diagrams and photos of his family. Jamal appeared on screen first, calling from his dorm at University of Illinois, where he was studying engineering on a full scholarship. "Bro, I watched your presentation," Jamal said, grinning. "I understood maybe 15% of it, but what I got was sick. You're basically teaching computers to think like you. More like teaching them to think like anyone with experience and insight," Eli corrected. "But yeah, essentially." The twins joined the call from their shared laptop, Maya enthusiastic and Marcus thoughtful as always. "The Chicago Tribune did an article about you," Maya said. "They called you the Southside prodigy who's revolutionizing artificial intelligence. Mrs. Chen has like 50 copies." "Of course she does," Eli said, smiling. Mrs. Chen had been his biggest cheerleader throughout everything, attending his MIT graduation, visiting campus regularly, maintaining their connection despite the distance. Keisha's face filled a quadrant of the screen, her expression serious despite being only 14. "Eli, I have a question about the topology problem you sent me last week. I think I solved it, but I want you to check my proof." "Send it over," Eli said. "I'll look tonight." "How's the summer program going?" "Amazing. We're working on number theory problems that would have destroyed me a year ago, but now they're just hard instead of impossible." Keisha paused. "I never thought I'd be good at this. I thought math was your thing, not mine." "Math is everyone's thing if they find the right entry point," Eli said. "You're brilliant, Keish. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His aunt's voice came from off-screen. "Tell your brother I'm proud of him even though I don't understand half of what he does anymore." "Oh, she says she's proud," Keisha relayed, laughing. After they disconnected, Eli sat in the quiet of his apartment and felt the weight of gratitude settle over him. 5 years ago, he'd been terrified of losing himself if circumstances changed. But he'd learned something crucial. Identity wasn't fixed by circumstances. It was built through choices, maintained through values, strengthened through connection. He was still the same person who'd stepped forward to help a crying baby. He'd just become a version of himself with more tools to help more people. His phone rang. Wei Lin, calling from her position at Stanford's AI research lab. "I saw the presentation footage," she said without preamble. "Eli, this is Nobel Prize level work. You know that, right?" "It's early stage," Eli protested. "We need years more testing, refinement." "It's revolutionary," Wei Lin interrupted. "And you deserve to acknowledge that. Remember the IMO? Remember how scared we both were? Look at us now." "You're changing entire fields. I'm leading research teams." "We made it, Eli." "We did," he agreed softly, "against pretty significant odds. Because we were smart enough to see patterns and brave enough to reach for help when it was offered," Wei Lin said. "Those are the same skills, Eli. The mathematical thinking that won us medals is the same thinking that let us recognize opportunities and take them. It's all connected." They talked for an hour, trading ideas about their respective research, planning a collaboration that would merge her work on neural networks with his pattern recognition algorithms. The conversation flowed with the easy brilliance of two minds that understood each other, that spoke the same language of elegant solutions and complex problems. The following week, Eli returned to Chicago for a special event. The Nexus Mathematical Talent Initiative was celebrating its 5th anniversary, and Eli had been invited as keynote speaker to address the current cohort of students in the program. He stood in the same Southside Community Center where his own banner had hung 5 years ago, looking at a room full of talented kids from circumstances similar to his own, and felt the full weight of responsibility and possibility. 5 years ago, he told them, I was sitting where you're sitting, talented but limited by circumstances I hadn't chosen, brilliant but invisible to systems that didn't know how to see me. I had a teacher who believed in me, a family who supported me, and a whole lot of determination, but I wasn't sure it would be enough. He paused, making eye contact with students who looked back with a mixture of hope and skepticism that he recognized intimately. Then I got on a plane to compete in a mathematics competition that felt impossible. And on that plane, I made a choice that changed everything. I saw a problem I knew how to solve, a screaming baby with an ear infection, and I stepped forward to help even though I was terrified of how I'd be perceived. That choice, that willingness to be seen and to offer what I had, led to a connection that opened doors I didn't know existed. He told them about Caleb, about the guardianship, about the years of hard work that followed. But he was careful to frame it correctly, not as a fairy tale rescue, but as an example of how preparation meeting opportunity could create transformation. "Here's what I learned," Eli said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Talent is universal, but opportunity is not. You all have talent. That's why you're in this program. But talent alone isn't enough. You need 3 things. First, the courage to be visible, to step forward even when you're afraid. Second, the wisdom to accept help when it's offered genuinely. And third, the commitment to remain yourself while your circumstances change. That last one is hardest, but it's most important." A girl in the front row raised her hand, her voice tentative. "How do you know if someone's help is genuine or if they just want to feel good about helping poor kids?" "That's an excellent question," Eli said, appreciating her directness. "You evaluate intentions by looking at what's being asked of you. Genuine help asks you to be better, to work hard, to grow. But it doesn't ask you to change who you are fundamentally. It doesn't ask you to be grateful beyond reason or to perform your struggles for others' comfort. Genuine help creates space for you to become who you're meant to be. Performative help asks you to stay small so the helper can feel big." He spent another hour with the students, answering questions, looking at their mathematical work, seeing himself reflected in their hungry minds and cautious hope. Several came up afterward with specific questions about university applications or research opportunities, and Eli gave each one his personal email, promising to stay connected. Mrs. Chen found him as he was preparing to leave, pulling him into a tight hug. "You're doing exactly what your mother hoped you'd do," she said. "Succeeding, yes, but also lifting others as you climb. That's the real measure of achievement." "I learned that from you," Eli said. "You stayed after school 3 days a week for 2 years for one student. You showed me what genuine investment looks like." "And you've scaled it," Mrs. Chen said with pride. "Through this program, through your research, through everything you do. You're not just smart, Eli. You're good. That matters more." That night, Eli had dinner with Caleb and Marcus at the Gold Coast condo that had once felt impossibly luxurious, but now just felt like home. Marcus, eager to show Eli everything new in his life, dragged him through an elaborate explanation of first-grade mathematics that was adorable in its earnestness. "And then you carry the one," Marcus explained seriously, showing Eli his homework. "See? That's the trick." "That is the trick," Eli agreed, equally serious. "You figured out one of the fundamental principles of addition. Nice work." After Marcus was put to bed, Caleb and Eli sat on the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights spreading out beneath them like earthbound stars. The silence between them was comfortable, built on years of conversation and shared experiences. "I've been thinking," Caleb said eventually, "about succession planning for Nexus, about what comes next after I eventually step back from daily operations." "You're not that old," Eli said, amused. "You've got decades left." "Maybe, but I want to build something that outlasts me, that continues the philosophy we've developed together, looking for elegant solutions, investing in overlooked talent, using resources to create opportunity rather than just accumulate wealth." Caleb turned to look at Eli directly. "I want you to consider joining Nexus in a leadership capacity. Not immediately. Finish your doctorate, do your postdoctoral work, establish yourself. But eventually, I'd like you to help shape the company's direction." Eli was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "I'm a mathematician, Caleb, not a business executive." "You're a problem solver who happens to use mathematics as your primary language," Caleb corrected. "But you solve human problems, systemic problems, ethical problems just as effectively. You've been helping shape Nexus's philosophy for years already, through the Talent Initiative, through our approach to AI ethics, through the culture you've helped create. I'm just asking you to formalize that role eventually. Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Eli?" Caleb's voice held unusual emotion. "Watching you grow these past 5 years has been one of the great privileges of my life. You're not just brilliant, you're wise, compassionate, and principled. Those qualities are rare separately and almost unheard of together. Whatever you decide about Nexus, I want you to know that helping you has been one of the best decisions I ever made. Not because of what you've accomplished, though that's remarkable, because of who you are. Eli felt his throat tighten. I wouldn't be here without you taking that risk on a random kid from a plane. You'd have found another path, Caleb said with certainty. Maybe harder, maybe longer, but you'd have gotten here because that's who you are. I just had the privilege of making the journey a little easier. The following month, Eli defended his doctoral dissertation to a packed room of faculty and students. His thesis on algorithmic pattern recognition in chaotic systems was unanimously approved with distinction, and several committee members mentioned that it represented the kind of groundbreaking work that appeared once in a generation. The achievement felt surreal and yet entirely earned, the culmination of years of work that had started with a screaming baby and a moment of compassionate courage. His entire family came to MIT for the graduation ceremony. His aunt, all four siblings, Mrs. Chen, and Caleb with Marcus. They were an incongruous group mixing Southside working class with tech wealth with academic achievement, but they were his people, and their presence meant everything. Dr. Brooks, Jamal said, testing out the title with a grin. That's going to take some getting used to. Tell me about it, Eli agreed. I still feel like I'm pretending to be a grown-up. You're 22 and you just earned a doctorate from MIT, Maya pointed out. I think you qualify as a grown-up. Plus you're famous, Keisha added. There were reporters at your defense. Reporters, Eli. For a math dissertation. The algorithm has applications beyond pure mathematics, Eli explained. That's why there's media interest. It's not about me. It's about the potential impact. It's always about impact with you, his aunt said, pulling him into a hug that smelled like home. Familiar perfume and unconditional love. Even when you were little, you always wanted to help. Your mama would be so proud, baby. So proud she'd probably cry just looking at you in that doctoral robe. That night, they all went to dinner at an Italian restaurant Caleb had reserved entirely for their group. It was loud and chaotic, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, Marcus entertaining the twins with elaborate stories, Jamal arguing good-naturedly with Keisha about something mathematical, Mrs. Chen and his aunt swapping stories about Eli's childhood. Caleb stood and clinked his glass, calling for attention. I want to make a toast, he said, waiting for silence. 5 years ago, I met a 16-year-old on a plane who solved an impossible problem in 5 minutes. He calmed my screaming son when nothing else worked, and in doing so, he taught me something crucial about how problems get solved, not through throwing money or resources at them, but through genuine understanding and creative thinking. He looked at Eli, his expression warm. Since then, I've watched that 16-year-old become a man who's changing the world, not just through brilliant technology, though that's impressive, but through the way he approaches everything, with compassion, integrity, and the fundamental belief that elegant solutions exist if you're brave enough to look for them. Eli, you've made me a better person, a better father, and a better leader. Thank you for taking the risk of accepting help. Thank you for staying true to yourself while letting circumstances transform. And thank you for showing my son what real success looks like, not wealth or status, but using your gifts to help others find theirs. Glasses clinked around the table, and Eli had to blink back tears. Marcus, not entirely understanding but catching the emotional tone, came over and hugged Eli's legs. You're my favorite person except for Dad, Marcus announced. And sometimes you're my actual favorite. Don't tell Dad. I heard that, Caleb said dryly, but he was smiling. Later, after everyone had gone their separate ways for the night, Eli walked through Cambridge alone, his doctoral hood folded carefully in his bag, his mind full of memories. He thought about the plane, about those hours of screaming and desperation that had seemed unbearable at the time but had led to everything that followed. He thought about the IMO, about the terror of competition and the triumph of proving he belonged. He thought about his mother, wondering what she'd think of the man he'd become, hoping she'd recognize her son beneath the achievements and opportunities. His phone buzzed with a message from Wei Lin. Congratulations, Dr. Brooks. Now get ready to change the world. Another from David Chen, his IMO teammate, who was now doing postdoctoral work at Princeton. Told you that you were brilliant. Now everyone else knows too. and one from Caleb, sent after he'd gotten Marcus to sleep. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Your mother would be too. She raised someone extraordinary. Eli stood on the Harvard Bridge, looking at the Boston skyline reflected in the Charles River, and let himself feel the full weight of gratitude and accomplishment and possibility. He'd come so far from that terrified boy on the plane, but in essential ways, he was still exactly the same person. Someone who saw problems and solved them, who offered help when he could, who looked for elegant solutions in apparent chaos. The difference now was that he had tools, resources, and platforms to help it scale. The Nexus Mathematical Talent Initiative was already changing lives, giving opportunities to kids who reminded him of his younger self. His research was being applied to problems that mattered: healthcare, emergency response, climate prediction, financial access for underserved communities. And he was just beginning, with decades ahead to refine his approach and expand his impact. A year later, Eli was invited to give a TED Talk about his journey and his research. He stood on the famous red circle in front of an audience of thousands, with millions more watching via live stream, and told his story with the same honesty he'd brought to everything else. "I'm often asked what the key was to my success," he said near the end of his talk. "People want to know if it was intelligence, hard work, lucky breaks, or mentorship. The answer is yes. All of those things mattered. But what mattered most was making choices in moments of uncertainty, choosing to step forward when I could have stayed invisible, choosing to accept help when pride told me to refuse, choosing to remain myself even as my circumstances transformed beyond recognition." He paused, making eye contact with Caleb in the front row, Marcus sitting beside him and actually paying attention for once. The screaming stopped on that plane 5 years ago, but what started has never stopped expanding. That's the nature of elegant solutions. They solve the immediate problem, but they also create possibilities you couldn't predict. They ripple outward, touching lives you'll never meet, creating connections across barriers that seemed insurmountable. He advanced to his final slide, showing the logo of the Nexus Mathematical Talent Initiative, surrounded by photos of students in the program, dozens of young faces, diverse and brilliant and full of potential. These students are the real legacy of that flight. They're finding elegant solutions to their own challenges, reaching for opportunities that didn't exist for them a few years ago, preparing to change the world in ways I can't imagine. That's what matters. Not individual achievement, but collective elevation. Not solving your own problems, but teaching others to solve theirs. The applause was thunderous. Eli took his bow and exited the stage to find Caleb and Marcus waiting in the wings. "That was even less boring than your last talk," Marcus informed him seriously. "Only one graph." "High praise from you," Eli said, laughing and lifting the now 7-year-old into a hug. "I'll try to include even fewer graphs next time." "Eli," Marcus said, his small arms around Eli's neck, "when I grow up, I want to help people like you do. How do I do that?" Eli set him down and knelt to eye level, thinking carefully about his answer. "You start by paying attention. You notice when people need help, even when they don't ask for it. You learn to see patterns others miss. You work hard at understanding how things really work, not just how they appear. And most importantly, you stay kind while you get smart. Can you do that?" "I think so," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Will you help me?" "Always," Eli promised. "That's what we do. We help each other. That's how everything good starts." As they left the venue, Eli received a call from MIT's mathematics department. They were offering him a faculty position, assistant professor with tenure track, his own research lab, graduate students to mentor. It was everything he'd worked toward, the culmination of a journey that had started with curiosity and compassion on a transatlantic flight. "When do they need an answer?" Caleb asked after Eli explained the offer. 2 weeks. But I'm also considering Caleb's offer to join Nexus, and there's a research position at Stanford that Wei Lin's been pushing me toward. I have options, which is itself remarkable. What does your gut tell you? Eli thought about it, applying the same pattern recognition skills he'd built his career on. MIT meant pure research, academic freedom, training the next generation of mathematicians. Stanford meant collaboration with Wei Lin, proximity to Silicon Valley innovation, practical applications of theory. Nexus meant directly shaping how technology and business could create opportunity, scaling the impact he'd already begun. I think, Eli said slowly, I want to split my time. Research at MIT, advising for Nexus, maybe consulting at Stanford. Not choose one path, but weave them together into something new. Academic rigor, practical application, and systemic change all integrated. That's very you, Caleb observed with a smile. Finding the elegant solution that makes false dichotomies irrelevant. Over the following months, Eli negotiated arrangements that let him do exactly that. He accepted the MIT position at reduced teaching load, joined Nexus's board of directors as a strategic advisor, and established a formal research collaboration with Stanford's AI ethics program. It was ambitious and demanding, but it felt right, using his gifts in multiple domains, refusing to be limited by conventional career paths. His siblings continued to thrive. Jamal graduated with honors in engineering and joined a renewable energy startup, applying the problem-solving skills he'd learned watching Eli. The twins both won academic scholarships to strong universities, Maya pursuing veterinary medicine, and Marcus studying mathematics education, wanting to be like Mrs. Chen. And Keisha, showing perhaps the most mathematical talent of all of them, was being recruited by IMO preparation programs and showing every sign of following in Eli's footsteps. I never thought all 5 of us would make it to college, his aunt said one Sunday dinner at Caleb's condo, which had become a regular gathering place for their extended, unconventional family. I hoped, but I didn't dare believe. And now look, all of you thriving, all of you together still, all of you helping each other climb. That's what family does, Eli said simply. We learned that from you, from Mom, from everyone who invested in us when they had nothing extra to give. Mrs. Chen, now retired but still attending every family gathering she could, raised her glass. To second chances and first opportunities. To elegant solutions and stubborn courage. To families built by choice as much as by blood. And to Eli, who showed us all what's possible when talent meets opportunity and humility. They drank to that, and the conversation flowed into evening. Stories and laughter and plans for the future weaving together like threads in a tapestry. At one point, Eli found himself on the balcony with just Caleb, both of them looking out at the lake that had witnessed so much of their shared journey. Do you ever think about that flight? Caleb asked. About how different everything could have been if you'd stayed in your seat? Sometimes, Eli admitted. But I also think about how nothing happens in isolation. Yes, I stepped forward to help Marcus. But I was only able to do that because my grandmother taught me, because I'd raised my siblings, because circumstances had forced me to develop skills I never wanted to need. The flight was a catalyst, but the real story started long before and continues long after. That's a very mathematical way of looking at it, Caleb observed. Everything connected, everything part of larger patterns. Because that's how the world actually works. We tell stories about single moments that change everything, but really it's about accumulation, choices adding up, skills building on each other, connections creating networks of possibility. Eli paused. You took a chance on me, but you were only able to do that because you'd been thinking about legacy and opportunity and what wealth should actually accomplish. You'd had Marcus and realized parenthood was harder than business. You were ready to see me because circumstances had prepared you to look. So we're both products of patterns, Caleb said. Yours visible in your circumstances, mine invisible in my privilege. Exactly. And the real work, the work the Talent Initiative does, the work my research enables, the work Marcus will hopefully do someday, is making those patterns more visible so we can change them intentionally. Not hoping for lucky connections on planes, but creating systems where talent gets opportunity regardless of where it starts. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd been brought together by a crying baby and had built something meaningful from that chaotic moment. The wind off the lake was cool, carrying the scent of water and possibility. Below them, Chicago spread out in every direction, Eli's South Side neighborhood visible in the distance, Caleb's Gold Coast address beneath their feet, and everything in between waiting to be explored and understood and improved. Thank you, Eli said quietly, for seeing me, for taking the risk, for believing I could become who I needed to be without losing who I was. Thank you, Caleb replied just as quietly, for teaching me that the best solutions aren't the most expensive or most powerful. They're the most elegant, for showing Marcus what real strength looks like, for proving that investing in people is the only investment that truly multiplies. Inside, Marcus called for them to come back, something exciting happening in the game he was playing with Keisha. They went in together, leaving the philosophical moment on the balcony and returning to the warm chaos of chosen family, shared meals, and ordinary magic. Years continued to pass. Eli's research transformed multiple fields. The Nexus Mathematical Talent Initiative expanded to 20 cities, helping thousands of students. Marcus grew up watching Eli as a model of what success with integrity looked like. Eli's siblings built their own remarkable lives, each finding their version of elegant solutions to the challenges they faced. And through it all, the story of the flight became something of a legend, told in TED Talks in business schools, in mathematics departments, and social justice forums. But Eli always insisted on telling it correctly, not as a fairy tale about rescue, but as a truth about connection, about courage to be visible, about the transformative power of compassion meeting opportunity. On the 10th anniversary of the IMO competition, Eli returned to Imperial College for a reunion of his team. David was there, now a tenured professor. Wei Lin came from Stanford, her own groundbreaking research earning accolades. Dr. Martinez attended, retired but still following her students' achievements with fierce pride. "We made it," David said, looking around at his former teammates who'd all become leaders in their fields. "We were terrified kids taking impossible exams, and we made it. Because we were brave enough to try," Wei Lin added, "and smart enough to help each other. And lucky enough," Eli said quietly, "to have people who saw our potential and invested in it. That's what I want to make sure we pay forward, not just succeeding individually, but creating systems where the next generation of scared, talented kids has clearer paths to their potential." That night, Eli video called his family from his London hotel room. His aunt was there, older now but still fierce in her love. His siblings appeared one by one, each calling from their own lives, their own successes. And Caleb joined with Marcus, who was now 16 himself, the same age Eli had been on that transformative flight. "Marcus is considering mathematics for university," Caleb said with a wry smile. "I wonder where he got that idea." "I just think patterns are cool," Marcus said with teenage nonchalance, but his eyes held the same hunger Eli remembered from his own adolescence, that drive to understand how things truly worked beneath surface complexity. "Then study them," Eli encouraged. "Find your own version of elegant solutions. Not mine, yours. That's the whole point." After the call ended, Eli sat in his hotel room and thought about circles closing and spirals opening. 10 years since the IMO, 5 years since his doctorate, a lifetime since his mother's death had set him on this unexpected path. And tomorrow stretching ahead with challenges to solve, problems to address, patterns to discover. The crying had stopped long ago, but its echoes continued to reverberate, in lives changed, systems reformed, opportunities created where none had existed. One moment of compassion, multiplied by years of work and intention and refusal to accept limitations, had transformed into something far larger than Eli had ever imagined that terrified day on the plane. He pulled out the gold medal, still in his possession after all these years, and held it to the light. It represented achievement, yes, but more importantly, it represented belief. Mrs. Chen's belief, his family's belief, Caleb's belief, and eventually his own belief that elegant solutions existed even in the most chaotic circumstances, and that he deserved to reach for them. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from Caleb. "Proud of who you've become. Your mother would be too. Keep finding those elegant solutions. The world needs them now more than ever." Eli smiled and typed back. The screaming stopped, but the gratitude never will. "Thank you for everything." He set down his phone and looked out at London's lights, thinking about a 16-year-old boy who'd stepped into first class with nothing but a battered backpack and the courage to offer help. That boy was gone, transformed into a man with resources and influence and platforms. But the essential core remained unchanged. Someone who saw problems and solved them, who offered help when he could, who believed that talent existed everywhere, even when opportunity did not. The story that had begun with a crying baby and a moment of compassionate courage continued to unfold, rippling outward in ways that were both elegantly simple and beautifully complex. And somewhere in Chicago, in classrooms and community centers and late-night study sessions, the next generation of Elise was discovering their own gifts, preparing to step forward into their own moments of transformation, learning that elegant solutions existed in chaos if you were only brave enough to look for them. The crying had stopped. The gratitude never would. And the pattern they'd created together, Caleb and Eli, privilege and potential, circumstance and choice, continued to expand, touching lives they'd never meet, proving that sometimes the most important mathematics happen not on paper, but in the spaces between people, where courage and compassion could solve problems that numbers alone never could. That was the real proof, the elegant solution hiding in plain sight. The change began not with systems or policies or programs, though those mattered, but with individual moments of choice, to see, to help, to reach, to accept, to transform while remaining true. And that proof, once discovered, was something no one could ever take away.